Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show for the America First, Second, and Third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, August 28th, 2013, middle of the week hump day. Corporate media is spending a lot of time talking about today being the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Here we are 50 years later, and we have Obama saying, I have a drone. I have a drone that kills everybody, whites and blacks and young and old and men and women. I think it's a step down myself. Looking real quickly at the stock market, it's amazing. The magic elves are back at work. I mean, the markets have been hammered all over the world ever since they started concocting this excuse to invade Syria. And somehow, magically today, the American markets are all way up in the green. Got to save all those Wall Street firms from being insolvent from all those huge blocks of stock that they've been buying here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today, and obviously Syria is going to be a huge, huge part of it. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, the motto in Washington, D.C. today seems to be, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. And after that whopper they told last week about how Assad was dumb enough to invite in UN chemical weapons inspectors, then launch a chemical weapon attack right in front of them, now they're trying to sort of go some other direction. And now, late last night, it was being announced that U.S. spies had intercepted a phone call from a Syrian defense chief about the use of chemical weapons from their chemical weapon military unit. Now, stop and think. The Syrian government and the Syrian military knows just as well as you do that the NSA is listening to every phone call that's out there. They're not going to talk about chemical weapons in the clear. Now, it's interesting because the actual content of the call was the Syrian defense chief calling to ask what happened when that initial report of a Syrian gas attack came out. That doesn't indicate they were giving orders and saying, go ahead and use it. He was calling his chemical weapons unit to say, was it you guys? And the reply, of course, has been omitted from all the reports. But they're out there saying, oh, absolutely, yes, this phone call does it. This phone call absolutely does it. American spies prevail again. We've got the goods on Assad right now. And then, of course, Israel, which can't resist the temptation to gloat about how great they are, came out and announced that they are the ones who intercepted this phone call, proving that the chemical weapons were deployed by Assad. Absolutely here. So the story all basically tracks back to this Israeli official, who must remain anonymous, quoting a Mossad agent, who has to remain hidden, of course, insisting that they're experts in wiretapping, who cannot be named, intercepted a conversation, just how they won't say, proving Assad is behind the recent chemical weapons attack on women and children. And of course, if you can't trust the Israelis, who can you trust in this world here? Now, speaking of Mossad agents, I've mentioned this name before. I'd love to get him on the show, but I'm unable to get a message to him at this time. Guy by the name of Viktor Ostrovsky, ex-Mossad agent, got fed up and quit. He lives in the United States now. I think he's in Arizona, and he makes his living as a fine art painter. His pictures are in the galleries all over there. And he wrote a book called By Way of Deception, where he talks about the dirty tricks Israel plays on other countries to get them to kill Israel's enemies. And there's one story here that is germane to the current discussion. And it involves how Israel smuggled a radio transmitter into Tripoli, Libya, and used it to broadcast phony messages ordering terror attacks on frequencies they knew the U.S. was listening to in order to trick Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya. They've already done that. They've been caught doing it. They're exposed for doing that. So now we have Israel saying, oh yes, we've intercepted this phone call. It absolutely proves that Assad really was dumb enough to invite in those chemical weapons inspectors and launch a chemical weapon attack right in front of him. He is that stupid. He's Assad. He's stupid, of course. People on the other side of that border, they're all stupid. They would do stupid things like that. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, if somebody were going to be making phone calls about chemical weapons when their national policy is not to use them, and by the way, Syria has as many locks on their WMDs as the United States does. If you're an Air Force captain, you can't just walk over to the bunker and say, hey, give me a nuke to fly around on the airplane just for the kicks of it. There's a lot of locks on that stuff. You certainly wouldn't do it in the clear. They'd use code phrases. I want you to deliver the cookies to Homs or wherever it was supposed to go. You know, the special cookies we talked about. They'd use code phrases. They're raising on a busted flush with lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. And by the way, the world is standing up to it. Over at INFOWARS.com, intelligence suggests Assad not behind chemical weapons attack. And by the way, a video has surfaced reportedly showing the rebels arming, loading, and launching what is clearly a home-built chemical weapon warhead. That's linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Remember, every other time the UN has gone into Syria to investigate a chemical weapon attack, they've basically come out and said it was the rebels. That's why the U.S. didn't want the UN inspectors in there this time, because every time they go in there, they come back and say, it's not Assad, it's the rebels. More articles over at WorldNet. Daily Syria gas attack, the work of the U.S. allies. Nobody's buying this stuff here. Nigel Farage is over there saying the British government is the keenest of all on the Syria intervention. They're going to distract from their economic problems by lots of bloody guts and all that stuff. And he says the decision's been made. This is a replay of Iraq, where the decision to go to war in Iraq was made. Then the propaganda was fixed around that agenda. Remember the Downing Street memo or Tony Blair's dodgy dossier? And they just come up with all this manufactured stuff to convince people, oh yes, we have to go to war. There is no choice. All right-thinking people love war and they love battle, and they will throw their children onto our designated enemies here. There is a report that we are getting out of 21st Century Wire that British SAS forces are in fact already inside Syria trying to locate potential targets for the coming military strike, because obviously by now Assad is dispersing his forces and assets. They're on mobile platforms. He's running them around the roads trying to keep their locations hidden from the targeting people, and SAS are already inside Syria spying on them and saying, oh yes, here's something that we need to take out. Now, Cameron is hitting major obstacles trying to sell this war. I mean, the British people are just as overwhelmingly opposed to this as the American people are. And Cameron has been forced to call Parliament back for a vote on moving forward with the attack on Syria, and it's looking like he's not going to get it because the Labour Party is saying absolutely no. There is no legal basis for any action. And so Britain is trying to go to the United Nations to get a UN resolution. They're not going to get it. China and Russia will veto. But Cameron is desperate to try and somehow legitimize this attack, this blatant, outright attack on Syria for no reason at all. They're just scrambling for some kind of cover and legitimacy here. And they're running into a brick wall over at the United Nations. And this is where the fact that the NSA was spying on the United Nations is going to come back to haunt the U.S. and Great Britain, who was party to this whole thing here. Obama is running into serious resistance for most of Congress. There are obviously the Israel firsters who are out there saying, oh, yes, we got to go. You take your children and throw them onto the enemy. But we now have 82 members of the House of Representatives saying that Obama needs approval from Congress on Syria. He cannot move forward with this war. Obama's response to that is a little bit different from Cameron's. He's simply going to ignore the Congress. You got, go back to that building. I'll just take care of this. We'll be back with more about this after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Obama has basically said, well, we're not going to pay any attention to the Congress. I don't need them. And Representative Peter King is out there proclaiming that Obama has the right to attack Syria anytime he decides to. And Peter, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, watch your head climbing into that transport. We'll call Assad and tell him you're on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But we're not sending our children off to another war based on such obvious and pathetic and desperate lies. And by the way, Peter King is wrong, wrong, wrong. The president does not have the right or legal authority to simply launch a war into Syria. Now, we've seen a lot of people going on and on about the War Powers Act allows the president to act without the permission of Congress. Not exactly true. Now, the reason the War Powers Act was passed by Congress was in the wake of Korea and Vietnam, which were wars started without congressional authorization. Remember, under the Constitution, only Congress can declare a war. And so Congress passed the War Powers Act to specifically and explicitly limit the president's authority to engage in military action. The president can order our forces into combat under only 3 conditions. There has to be a congressional declaration of war, as the Constitution says, some other congressional authorization, like Congress did back in 2002, I think it was, the authorization for the use of force in Iraq, or he can act without the permission of Congress for 30 days only in the case of a direct attack on the United States of America itself. Iraq did not attack the United States of America. Afghanistan did not attack the United States of America. Syria has not attacked the United States of America. Iran has not attacked the United States of America. The only attack on America is back on 9/11/2001, and pretty much everybody understands that was staged. It was a false flag conducted by the U.S. government, aided by Israel, to launch this century of unending war and conquest being promoted by the neocons over at the Project for the New American Century. So, in point of fact, under the letter of the law, under the letter of the Constitution, Barack Obama does not have the authority to send U.S. military forces into Syria without a declaration of war by the Congress, because Syria has not attacked us. I'm sure by now over in the White House they're saying, we got to fake something. We got to fake Syria attacking us. Have Israel sink one of those warships and we'll say it was Syria. Now, over at the United Nations, of course, the Security Council is meeting on the resolution being put forward by Great Britain that, yes, we have to go into Syria, and it's meeting huge, huge resistance. They had a preliminary meeting this morning, which Russia and China reportedly just walked out on, following the announcement by the U.S. official present that the Syria crisis is past the point of no return, and the United States absolutely disregards whatever the Security Council is going to do. Now, they're going to have a vote on this resolution this afternoon. Obviously, Russia and China will exercise their vetoes. And the U.S. is going to invade anyway. So already right from the start, under United States law, under international law, this is a war crime Obama is getting ready to commit. There is no legal justification for this, even if the story about Assad gassing his own people in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors was true, and it doesn't make any sense. There's no legal basis for Obama to just on his own send your kids off to die in another war in some other country that refuses to run their economy by the rules the private central bankers have declared by fiat for all of planet Earth. Now, over in Great Britain, they're having the same results with their polls we're seeing here in the United States of America. Poll we keep seeing pop up here in the U.S. Only 9% of Americans support military intervention into Syria. That 9% is easily accounted for by people on federal government paychecks, people in the military, people in the defense establishment. They never met a war they didn't like because it means lots of money for them and somebody else's kids get to die in it. The British people are saying exactly the same thing. Overwhelming opposition to intervention in Syria. In fact, polls taken in virtually every country that might be involved in this thing are saying the same thing. The people do not support and agree with this war. Getting a report out of Strat risks that U.S. Marine units are already positioned near Syria. So this idea that this is going to be a limited airstrike to punish Assad for chemical weapons. How dare he kill his own civilians, so we're going to launch a bunch of cruise missiles in and kill even more civilians. That'll teach him. That'll teach him that when it comes to the killing of civilians, that's the United States job and nobody else is allowed to intrude on that. So they're just cranking up the drums of war. Meanwhile, of course, the neocons in the United States are back. 71 former U.S. government officials and foreign policy experts sent this letter to Obama saying, oh, yes, you've got to respond to Assad's chemical. You've got to bomb Syria to maintain your credibility, which is a lost cause because Obama doesn't have any credibility left to salvage, which is a really dumb excuse to drop bombs on people. I have a suggestion to President Obama, or whoever it is he's got listening to my radio show to see what I'm saying today. Let's send those 71 people who signed that letter in with the first wave. Put them right on the front line. Now, here's an interesting story. The New York Times came out with an article in support of John Kerry's comments about Syria and inadvertently stepped into a big bear trap because they reported on where this chemical weapon was launched from without realizing it was deeply within rebel-held territory in Syria. There's a big oopsie for you. Let's see. Blacklisted news in rush to strike Syria. U.S. tried to derail the UN probe, and I explained why that was. Every time the United Nations has gone in to look at one of these chemical attacks, they've come out and said it looks like it was the rebels. And the U.S. didn't want to take that chance this time. They've been fighting against the UN probe being there. They succeeded up to a point because the current chemical weapons inspectors in Syria on behalf of the United Nations have been ordered by Ban Ki-moon only to determine that chemical weapons were used. They are forbidden from trying to find out where they came from. So they're going to say, UN confirms chemical weapons in Syria. We're off to war against Assad. How do you know Assad did it? Well, Miss Cleo told us. We saw it in the tea leaves. We read the entrails. We gazed into the smoke coming up from our opium pipes, and we just know it was Assad. Let's see. It was only the middle of last month that they uncovered a chemical weapon lab being run by the Free Syria Army near Damascus. It just goes on and on and on. The evidence that it is the rebels, the hired mercenaries who are being supplied and funded by the U.S. and various other players in the region, they're the ones using the chemical attacks to blame on Assad to give the U.S. an excuse to invade. And we all know it. They all know that we know it. But for the sake of their credibility, they must continue the course. Government actually tends to operate more like a religion than anything else. It depends on the blind faith of the masses that the government is infallible. There's papal infallibility and there's Obama infallibility. We can't admit we lied or that we're wrong. It's much easier and better to go kill a bunch of innocent people to maintain the illusion of moral rightness. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And something just this second crossed my desk. I'm going to be posting it up to the website on the next commercial break. This is an op-ed in the New York Times written by Ian Hurd that says, bomb Syria even if it is illegal. So their attitude is, we want to do this. We don't care what the law is. We don't care that the UN isn't going to go along with this. We don't care that the American people don't want this. We don't care that NATO doesn't want to go along with this. We have decided we're going to bomb Syria because we've got to bring them back into the folds of private central banking. We have to make sure they only sell their oil and other resources for the dollar. We need to do this or the American way of life is in danger, meaning the American banks. That's what this is all about. Restoring the world of Bretton Woods, restoring the petrodollar, because the U.S. got lazy. The U.S. government and Wall Street got lazy because they were living high on the hog on getting a piece of the action of the commerce of the rest of the world. And they don't want that to go away. My goodness, those people might actually have to go out and find real jobs at minimum wage. I understand Starbucks is hiring. And to see this in the pages of the New York Times, that even if it's illegal to bomb Syria, yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. This is a war crime being put out right in front of you. And you should be angry. By the way, apparently protests are organizing all over the world, all over the country for this coming Saturday. We just posted a link to an article about that where you can go out to Facebook and do a search for the protests in your city, and I'm sure they're organizing. Just keep on looking, and if there isn't a protest near you, get out there and make one. Because we cannot stop this rogue government from going on out and murdering more people to prop up the dollar. But what we can do, what we should do, what we are morally obligated to do, is send a message to the rest of the world that we, the American people, do not buy all these lies about Assad and chemical weapons, that we do not support this campaign of endless war across the face of the earth to prop up banking systems. We deny all responsibility for the war crimes being committed in our name, because they're not in our name. We withdraw our support and allegiance from this illegal government here. We're going to grab a phone call here from somebody saying, winds of time out in California, aloha. Are you the people who make those wind chimes?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. I'm confusing you with somebody else.
An internet name.
Okay.
I want to thank you and Miss Claire for your patriotism and all you sacrifice and do. But if it's okay with you, I've never done this before. I've listened to you for quite a while, and I found you by accident, and I'm grateful I did. Mm-hmm. But I had to write this down, so if it'll take a couple minutes, and if you don't agree, then, you know, I understand.
Okay, but we got about 7 minutes left in the segment, so go for it.
Okay. First of all, the lies of the media and the government. 1776, 1812, that was the American people, patriots, the true Americans. President Lincoln was assassinated. Sinking of the Maine, 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the lies that followed, 1913, the lies, the terrorist acts committed on December 23rd, 1913, backed by President Wilson, World War I that immediately followed, the crash of 1928 as the real first money grab, the theft of the American people by the banks and then corrupt government, World War II and the lies, deceit, and traitorous acts and the murder of American people that thrust America into a war our government, or our own government, sponsored and in fact started. All the lies the American people were told afterwards, the Bay of Tonkin lies, attack on the USS Liberty that was allowed by Lyndon Johnson at the orders of the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, the $500 million that Lyndon Johnson made in profit from the Vietnam War, while the people and so many others died for the profits of the traders, our government and the bankers. JFK in July 1963 gave a speech he would dismantle the Federal Reserve. They killed him 4 months later.
5 months.
The Iran-Contra lies, Bush Sr. and the lies of the first Iraq War, Clinton and the lies and the theft of the American people throughout his and Hillary's career, the lies of Bush Jr., Colin Powell, Cheney, Rumsfeld, their lies, the theft and the murder, and all that died on 9/11, and all that die still today because of their lies. The theft of 2008 crash, the lies, the theft of the American people, the government and their banker controls, the theft of the people's homes, retirement, very lives, the future of our children, the deaths of SEAL Team 6 because of the lies about the false capture and death of bin Laden, the murder of Pat Tillman because he was going to expose the lies the lies and the releasing of Al-Qaeda members along with the poppy fields of the drugs the government controlled and transports to other countries. All the false flags perpetrated by our own government in order to attack, raid, and murder so they can control the people everywhere. And as you all know, my friends, the list does go on. I have no children, and this will be my most profound regret. The children our government has murdered and continues to murder, those children are our future. The United States government murders them for profit and control over people. I am 50 years old, winds of time, and I do see all.
Well, that's a very, very good article. You know, you really should write that down and have it posted someplace because you raise a very, very good point. I get a lot of emails from people saying, oh, you should be supporting the U.S. The U.S. government's in trouble. It deserves your support. And we were saying the other day, the old saying, my government right or wrong. But I think the time has come for the American people to look at the enormity of the crimes committed by this government against the American people, let alone the rest of the world, but against the American people, and seriously ask, is this a government that is worth sacrificing to support and protect?
You're exactly right. If I can continue about another
I'm sorry,
30
I
seconds.
thought you were done. Go ahead, finish up.
Oh, that's okay, sir. It is we the people the responsibility to stop the insane madness and to set things right. We the people need to arrest and hang all responsible for the lies and the murder of the people of the world. We the people of the world need to stand as one and exterminate the bankers and the corrupt governments so our children can live. Mr. Vladimir Putin, you are the only one of the governments of the world to stand as a true leader and nations against corrupt tyranny. I'm not saying that I love you or you're a great man, but you are standing as the only, as Mr. Rivero says, adult in the room. The world is smothered today. Please don't hold the American people responsible for the traitorous acts of our government. We must stand as one, all of us, and rid the world of these traitorous murderers. Children begin by loving their parents. As they grow older, they judge them. How will our children judge the world, judge us of the world? Those that might live, that is. America and the free world must stand together. I'm sorry.
It's okay, I understand.
All corruption must die for our children to live. I thank you, Mike, for you and Miss Claire and everyone like you. You are the true patriots as Ron Paul. I'm winds of time and I see everything. Please, Mike, if you can, check out worldnewsdaily.com. I'm not plugging them or nothing.
Yeah.
I just found them the other day. And I found something very interesting that has just been put out, and the truth about Obama, I believe, is there, if you can see what you think. Thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work, stay strong, and live well. The true we the people. Thank you, Michael.
All right, well, thank you very much for those very, very kind words. We're coming up here on a commercial break, and so I'm going to have to let you go. I am not advocating anybody trying to walk up to anybody in the government and arrest them right now, because you will be shot. That's why they've been buying all this hollow point ammunition. But what we can do that is effective, and Occupy was trying to do it before they got crushed and oppressed down, is to stand up and say to the financial interests around the rest of the world, we the people will no longer be the wallet of last resort for all the crime and corruption coming out of Wall Street. And it's already working. Foreign investment in the United States has dropped about 30% so far. Foreign governments and foreign banks are no longer loaning money to the United States. They're not buying our Treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve is having to print up oodles of paper and ink to buy the paper and ink being printed up by the Treasury so they can shuffle it back and forth and pretend to themselves the system is working. It is going to crash. That's why they're so desperate to get this war going, because that is what this government does. Every time this Ponzi scheme financial system gets into trouble and on the verge of collapse, they get into a world war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and we are on the verge of a major escalation into World War III. They're going to go for it all on this next one. No more piecemeal. They're going for it all. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking of the panic being on, I'm sure that's the feeling inside the White House right now, because the utter and complete collapse of this official reason to invade Syria has probably made the government understand this is the last war they're going to be able to start and launch with a big steaming pile of bovine excrement, because nobody is buying it any longer. But we know that Syria is not the end of the agenda. In order to get the petrodollar back on track, to get the world back onto Bretton Woods, they have to go all the way. And so I think, especially in light of the fact that the War Powers Act does not allow the president to launch attacks into other countries that are not actually attacking us, I think they're going to go for the whole thing right now, not just Syria. And I was seeing earlier today on Fox News where they're trying to basically blur Iran and Syria together. They were showing a map of the war region, and they had Syria and Iran highlighted, and the border between them was virtually gone. It's Iran, Syria, Syria, Iran, Iran, Syrian. So they're starting to come up with a new word to try and blend them together. And the Russia bashing is cranking up. Oh, Russia's the problem. Russia's this and Russia's that. And from the point of view of the White House, the only way they can move that war agenda forward, the war for the bankers, is they're going to have to go for it all right now. They can't just invade Syria, take a break, and come back with more lies about Iran or about anybody else and have any traction. They realize that now. And so I am very, very concerned that we are going to see some kind of a staged attack, quite probably against one or more of those U.S. warships off the coast of Syria, because that would constitute an attack on the United States, under which Obama could then invoke the War Powers Act and say, gosh darn those Syrians, they're shooting at our warships, blowing their country up. How dare they do that? I am very concerned that Israel could sneak in there with one of their Dolphin-class submarines, which are armed with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and blow all 4 ships out of the water, so they could say, oh, Iran gave one of their clandestine nuclear weapons to Syria, and Syria used it on us, and just go right on in. We're seeing reports from several places around the country of large-scale movements of armored vehicles on transport trucks heading to shipping ports. I know that the large military transports activity has been stepped up here in Honolulu over the last few days. They have to go for it all. They can't do Syria and stop. They have to go for it all, or this whole thing is over. By the way, Glenn Beck was on the air literally saying if they don't attack Syria, it'll be the end of the United States of America. And he's absolutely right, but not for the reasons he's suggesting. If this war for the bankers fails, if this war to force Bretton Woods on the rest of the world fails, the U.S. dollar is finished. It will come crashing down. And the Federal Reserve with it, Wall Street with it, the federal government with it, and we'll have a clean slate on which to build a new nation based on the original founding principles of the United States of America, which has to include no private central bank, no private central bank, no private central bank. Ever, 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 ever. Going to grab some phone calls here. Damien in South Carolina. Aloha. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I've had better days.
I hear you. Listen, first of all, the winds of change guy before, really some prophetic words. And the only comment I have to it, other than the fact that it was a great bunch of points that he made in his dialogue, is that unfortunately we learned from history that the rest of the world will hold people like you and I and every other American accountable because...
No. The bankers will hold us accountable.
Exactly.
They will say, oh, you have to pay the debts that were run up. But remember, war is considered an odious debt. And when the U.S. government loses this thing, we'll say, hey, we had nothing to do with this. What are they going to do? Deploy troops and arrest 300 million Americans for refusing to pay the war bill? I have no intentions of paying the cost of this war.
I don't know, but here's my whole take on this.
Okay.
First of all, my wife is from the former Soviet Union, and she gets phone calls from her family weekly saying, what is going on with you people over there in America? Why can't you get Obama to stop invading countries and stop doing all this stuff? And why did you let Bush get away with it?
Well, I think your wife could...
They think that they don't understand that our political system is rigged. They don't understand that our elections, you tell them to watch, Hacking Democracy, and they don't get it. And it's like, we have the bankers who run the world putting these people in office to then do their dirty deeds. And then, like you said, the bankers will hold the people accountable by telling the rest of the world, well, the American people never should have voted for Obama or Bush or Cheney, that was a slip of the tongue, Clinton, Daddy Bush and all that, that they're going to hold us accountable for what happens, just like they're holding us accountable. They
will, unless all 300 million Americans stand up and say, look, we aren't part of this. Our elections are rigged. We've been opposing it. Anybody who thinks the American people are going along blindly with this war agenda, send to my website. I'm coming up on the 20th anniversary of being a blogger and peace activist. Obviously, I'm an American. I was born in Boston. I'm a descendant of the signer of the Declaration here. I'm very obviously vocal in opposition to all of this stuff. And, and I refuse to accept responsibility, either morally or financially, for the costs of these wars because I am opposed to them.
Right. Right. I mean, I think, short of us, have you heard any more about that Jones guy in North Carolina, if he's going to push for articles of impeachment against Obama? Because he's the one a year ago when they told Sessions that, basically we don't go to Congress to go to war. We go to Obama can go to Libya and start a war if he wants to without Congress's approval. And then that Congressman Jones said if he does it again, we're going to have impeachment proceedings, and that seems to be what's going on right now with Syria.
Well, I know there's a lot of talk about impeachment right now, and the House might actually impeach, but the Senate won't convict. I'm not going to sit and wait for the government to correct itself because I've been waiting for that for 20 years and it hasn't happened. Okay, what I am waiting for is for this system to collapse, and it's on the verge of collapsing. That's why Glenn Beck is out there saying if we don't bomb Syria, it's all over. If they don't get this war going, it's the end because, we're coming up on the G20, and the G20's main topic is going to be abandoning the U.S. dollar as the global trade and reserve currency, and that will be the end of the party. And so the way that we, the American people, deny responsibility for all this is to get out there in the protests this weekend and just start saying to everybody on social media, I'm an American and I am not supporting any of this stuff this government is doing. The government has gone rogue. They are openly violating U.S. and international law. Call it government gone wild or something like that. But they don't represent we the people anymore, and we the people are not to blame for what they're doing. We're doing everything that we can within the letter of the law and peacefully to try and stop them.
Right.
And we will point back at that and say, look, we tried to avoid this mess. You cannot hold me to blame. The bankers will come back, of course, and say, oh, no, the debt is sacrosanct. You have to pay the debt, even if you didn't agree with it, because we have declared you are indebted to the bankers, and so forth and so on. And again, right now, the U.S. government would love an excuse to declare a national emergency and martial law. Do not allow the coming protests to become violent. There will be agent provocateurs trying to get this thing going. Because the government understands right now they are not loved, respected, or trusted by the ordinary people. We're coming up here on the Phyllis Schlafly commercial break. I know we got a whole bunch of callers waiting on the line right now, and I apologize. I wanted to try and get to all of you. You're going to have to wait for about 8 or 9 minutes, but I will get to all the callers waiting on the line. So, Damien, we're going to let you go, and we're going to try and squeeze in one more call from Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I got some important stuff. Can you hold me over through the break?
All right, I'm going to hold you over through the break here, and we're going to hold all the rest of the callers. And I want to finish up this segment here with a reminder of all the stories we are seeing in the Israeli press, how Israeli intelligence is behind the U.S. case against Syria. It's all coming out of Israel. Israel saying, oh, yeah, we have proof Syria did chemical weapons just like we had proof Saddam had nuclear weapons, and you have to go kill them for us. We're going to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be back with a whole ton of phone calls queued up after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And an alert listener pointed out an error. I misread Glenn Beck's article. He is saying we will not survive if we go to war. And on that, obviously, I agree with him. And I apologize for misquoting him. Back to the phone. Scott in Wisconsin, you had something you wanted to share with us.
Hey, Michael, first of all, Mike, I want to thank you for sticking by on the radio, first of all, of going the way that you have gone to wake up and understand about the banks that don't care about war. It's a blessing. I want to say I would stand with that guy that read those words a while back. He's a brother that I would have by me if I had to go fight for the freedom of this country. Michael, you are exactly right, brother. They are going to go for it all. Because I can confirm that they already handed out gas masks to the Israelis.
Yes.
And I'll tell you what, Michael, if that ain't going to rock your soccer Americans, Michael, get a pen and write this down. Guess who's heading out with his golden parachutes on the 1st of this year? Puppet Bernanke. Put it down in writing. Guess what's coming when he leaves? On the 1st, they are going to have floating rates by the treasurer on every mortgage. That's what's going to be thrown at the Americans. And guess who's going to be the mastermind that's going to take over Puppet Bernanke? Can you guess, Michael?
Why don't you enlighten us?
Mr. Larry Summers, who was the mastermind that bankrupted 2008. That's how we can confirm this fall. You watch the ferry market. I'm going to tell everybody, you better be a bear. You better run out of the woods. Because you're right on track, Michael. This is going to collapse, and they are going to try a massive war. And the sad thing about this, Michael, is this. When somebody starts tossing the first missile, that whole area is going to blow up in a powder keg. And it's sad.
I'm convinced.
Thanks for taking my call, brother, and you keep going there, brother. And I hope you can stay on the line forever. God bless.
As long as I can, I will continue to do so. I am convinced that the people behind this war agenda are at the point where they're going to just try and get it all going at the same time, because the absolute collapse of the lies about Assad inviting in UN chemical weapons inspectors and then launching a chemical weapon attack virtually in front of them didn't fly. Nobody's buying that one. And now they know they can't just invade Syria, wait a few months, and then gin up a new excuse to go into Iran. Nobody will buy it. And I think they're going to try and find some way to use this coming attack on Syria to trigger an escalation where they can just go to war against all of the world who refuses to go along with private central banking, all of the world who refuses to worship the dollar as the international trade and reserve currency, all of the world that refuses to sell their natural resources only for U.S. dollars. I think they're going to go for it all. We're at the all or nothing point here right now. Russia just announced they have hard evidence that the hired mercenaries launched that recent chemical attack. Apparently there have been 3 more, and Assad is asking the UN inspectors to go check those out as well. This thing is just spinning out of control. All right, Jim in Georgia dropped. Shannon in Tennessee. Aloha, Shannon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Brother Mike? Hey, just want to say to everybody, I encourage you guys to go out and protest this weekend if you can find a place or start a protest. Also, I would also urge everybody to be calling your Congress critters and senators and giving them holy heck about this. And I just tried to call the White House a while ago and emailed them, telling them not no but heck no. And this is the first time I've ever called the White House in years that I got a busy signal for probably close to 20, 30 minutes before I got through there. I suspect that a lot of Americans are calling and raising heck with them about this subject. And the lady that I talked to said that's all that people have been talking about today is Syria, and don't do it.
Well, it's great that you got through, and it's great that you call them and everything, but Obama already knows. Most Americans do not want this. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He knows.
But you got to, if you do everything you can, Brother Mike, that's all you can do, so you got a clear conscience and you can sleep at night. Like you said, I don't accept responsibility for something that was not in my best interest and that I was vehemently opposed to. But anyway, I appreciate it. I'm going to let you go. I just want to let you know, my thoughts on this subject. And that guy Wins that was on there earlier, I really appreciated his message.
All right. Well, thank you very much here, and we're going to switch over. Before I switch over to the next phone call here, the reality is we're seeing a President Obama, who, by the way, he's now on the steps at the mall, sort of trying to cloak himself with the aura of a Martin Luther King. He's out there saying, oh, Martin Luther King was great and all the rest of it. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Obama, I have a drone. And it's not going to work because we understand we have a president right now in the White House who has just already said he will ignore the will of the people, he will ignore the will of the United States Congress, he's ignoring the United Nations, he's ignoring NATO, he, by goodness, has decided he's going to attack Syria because that's what Wall Street and Israel wants, and that just, you might as well get used to the idea and stop confusing him with all the facts in the matter here. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, brother. I just want to let you know, because I'm interested here, that Wall Street Journal report quoted the weapons that Ban Ki-moon is not going to allow the inspectors to find out who did it.
Yep.
That's been scrubbed. Nobody's links will work. I was out there trying to find that, posted on my website.
Imagine my shock.
Something.
Oh, Winston Smith, he's on overtime right now. He's on overtime.
Well, I wanted to thank you for picking up on that email I sent you and putting out about the protest. We've got one here started in Fort Worth. Everybody go on Facebook and start one.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, you've got to make as much noise as you can. It's not going to deter the war hawks, but we need to send a message to the rest of the world that we, the people of the United States, are not going to stand by and do a Sieg Heil to Obama as he marches the world off to World War III. We're not going along with this.
Great show, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks a lot, Chuck. Interestingly enough, we're seeing the emergence of articles in the corporate media trying to sell the idea that it's okay to ignore the United Nations and NATO and domestic and international law because we have a moral responsibility. Now they're using morality. We have a moral obligation to go in and kill Syrian civilians to prove to Assad he can't kill Syrian civilians. And apparently Sweden's foremost expert on international law has penned an article. It was over in Speaker's Radio, saying that, yeah, there's ample precedent for going around the Security Council. Well, then what's the whole point of having the United Nations if rogue governments like the United States and Israel simply ignore them? That was the whole point of having a United Nations, to impose international standards of behavior in war on the world. Now, one day after Obama insisted that the coming attack on Syria had nothing to do with regime change, Brett Stevens is now out there saying, yes, they should target Assad. They should go for a decapitation strike because that will end the civil war in Syria by getting rid of Assad and his inner circle so the hired mercenaries can take over, which is what they've been trying to do for 3 years. Now, the good news here is that nobody bought the USDA choice bovine excrement on this. And there's a very interesting article over at the internetpost.net saying a victory for humanity. The American people have not been brainwashed by this anti-Assad propaganda. We remember the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons. We remember the lies about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. We remember the lies about Spanish mines in Havana Harbor. We know we're being lied to. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And boy, they are just using a snowblower to fling the bovine excrement at us. The Daily Mail is now claiming Assad is using napalm on his own people. And I just got an email from a listener in Great Britain saying that there's a lot of heavy Russia bashing going on in the British media right now. They're going to go for the whole thing. It's not just Syria. They are looking to kick off World War III for real. Now, remember the history of World War II. At the point Pearl Harbor happened, the event that sort of crystallized the fact that it was a world war, there had already been conflicts going on around the world for years. And then Pearl Harbor happened. Oh, yes, it's a world war. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. They're realizing they're not going to be able to just take Syria, wait a couple of months, and come back with another totally BS story about Iran and get that going. I think they're going to go for the whole thing right now. I really do. We're going to grab a call. George in Texas, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? You know, the thing is, I was sitting there reading a little bit about when Nixon went to Watergate, and Congress told the military, don't carry out bombings and stuff for President Nixon under the Watergate thing to try to distract people. That's what I heard what happened.
Okay, would you repeat that one more time, because I sort of lost.
No, but I heard Congress told the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Watergate scandal not to carry out, attacks, bombing Cambodia, doing this and doing that, trying to distract the people away from Watergate when it was going on.
I thought that's what you said. I've heard absolutely nothing about that. I know that at that point in time they were doing the bombings into Cambodia, which were simply being hidden from the American people. But that whole Watergate situation, the reason Nixon resigned is that had they gone into the motives for the break-in to the Watergate Hotel, it would have ripped open the whole John F. Kennedy assassination. So that's why Nixon resigned. I mean, his re-election was a study in foregone conclusions. You know, people were asking, why did you feel you needed to break into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel when it was obvious to everybody you were going to win by the largest landslide in history because of all the dirty tricks Creep had been pulling. And the reason was the Democrats had gotten hold of photographs of the tramps in Dealey Plaza that were clear enough to identify 2 of them as people working for Richard Nixon. And that was the reason for the whole break-in and the burglary. And Nixon resigned rather than risk having that come up as an issue during the Senate trial. Anything else, George?
All I can say is I'm praying that this war don't start, and I just hope this whole system collapses when it tries to when it hesitates. It just collapses on itself.
Well, I'm afraid the war is going to start. That has been made abundantly clear to us, and the only thing that we, the American people, can do in compliance with the law and peacefully is to stand up and shout to everybody around planet Earth, we're not part of this. We don't agree with it. We don't believe the propaganda. We are resisting this war with every ounce of our energy. We have 330 million members of the Order of the White Rose. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do a web search on that. That was the people in Germany who stood up and opposed Adolf Hitler. The Order of the White Rose here. All right, George, going to let you go. I got to make a couple of points here. I'm watching the corporate media, and Obama is still up there on the steps there for this big, huge commemoration about the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And it is very obvious he is trying to cloak himself in Martin Luther King's mantle. He's up there reiterating what Martin Luther King said and how great it is and how wonderful, and the United States stands for equality and justice and human rights and all the other stuff. And I can tell from the look on his face he knows the crowd isn't really buying it right now. And I have a message. Mr. Obama, you are no Martin Luther King. And shame on you for trying to wear the skin of the leopard like this as you wag your Nobel Peace Prize at everybody while unleashing white-hot flaming death all across the globe. Now, as you're probably already aware, one of the reasons this story about Assad and chemical weapons cratered was its utter absurdity on the face of it. Because the story was that Assad invited in UN chemical weapons inspectors, and then on the day they arrived, launched a chemical weapon attack on women and children right in front of them. That was the official story, and nobody bought that. It was absurd. So now they're trying to spin the story a little bit. This is coming out of Yahoo.com. That, no, it wasn't Assad who ordered the attack. He himself really didn't do it. It was his brother, who everybody knows is a moron and he's only an officer in the military because of nepotism, and he really wasn't thinking. So he was stupid enough to do this. And it sounds like the government is now reacting to the very critical, careful analysis of the original story. And this new one saying, oh, it wasn't Assad, it was his brother. This is the U.S. government saying, well, yeah, Rivero's right, Assad wouldn't be that dumb, but it was really his little brother, so we can go ahead with the attack. Now, the good news here is the propagandists are now reacting to us in the independent media. They're playing catch-up with our analysis and critique about what's going on. They have lost the initiative in the propaganda battle, which means they are losing the war for the minds of America, and that's a good thing here. Going to take another phone call here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello there, Mike. Hey, I just sent you an email. Gordon Duff just posted a video and a article on Veterans Today. The video shows these rebels launching the two separate accounts of these chemicals there, and he confirms that they were from Iraq, but they were sent up through Georgia and stuff like that, and into Turkey and then over. But interesting video there and an interesting article if you want to. But it's titled U.S. Contractors Cited for Syrian Gas there, okay?
All right, I'll take a look at that. I mean, we have one of the videos that came out already from the attack back on the 20th that clearly shows it's the rebels with this obviously home-built munition setting it up and getting ready to launch it. So we've got that video. It's already linked to whatreallyhappened.com. All right, Keith, we're going to let you go here. And again, you know, what is the next step for the U.S. government here? There's no doubt they're going to launch an attack on Syria. And there's also no doubt that everybody on planet Earth knows it's just all based on lies and fraud and deception. Remember when I said Iraq was historically important because it was the first war started with a lie, where the lie became known while the war was still being fought. Usually when you go back to World War I, World War II, the lies used to start the war don't surface until long after the war is over. Iraq was different. The lies that were used to start that war, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, the rest of it, were surfaced while the war was still being fought. Now we have a new historically important war, and that's the one in Syria, where the lies used to start it are known to the general public even before the shooting begins. And so now they know they're not going to be able to just grab Syria, give everybody a few months to calm down, and then go into Iran. They're going to have to go for it all. And I'm going to go on repeating this time and time again. I am very concerned that the United States or Israel will attempt to sink one of the U.S. warships, blame it on Syria and Iran to get the war agenda back on track. Israel's done it before. They tried to sink the USS Liberty and blame Egypt for it. Israel was screaming, Egypt's doing it, Egypt's doing it, up until it was obvious the Liberty wasn't going to sink, and there were going to be surviving witnesses who said it was Israelis shooting at us. At which point the story changed, and they said, oh, it was foggy, it was terrible weather. We thought it was an Egyptian horse transport, because we all know that Egyptian horse transports have giant dish antennas all over them. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And to recap on what we were saying during the first hour, we have a president who is in the process of committing a war crime before the eyes of the entire world. Because he's already said he is not going to consult with Congress. He's not going to comply with the limitations imposed on the president by the War Powers Act. He's going to ignore the United Nations Security Council. He's going to ignore NATO. He's certainly ignoring you and I. And he's going to go ahead and attack Syria on this bogus claim that Assad was dumb enough to invite in the UN chemical weapons inspectors, then launch a chemical weapon right in front of them. So that's kind of what's going on over there. And not surprisingly, Obama's Department of Justice has just granted what is called procedural immunity for war crimes against his predecessors that launched all of this thing. George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and Paul Wolfowitz are being granted procedural immunity in a case alleging that they planned and waged the Iraq War in violation of international law. We have a criminal government waging criminal wars. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of a cyber attack. Janet Napolitano has stepped down as head of the Department of Homeland Security, and in her farewell speech she was going on and on about a potential cyber attack. We know that cyber attacks across the web are going up. There was that glitch that hit the American stock markets last week. China got hit with a huge denial of service attack. We're seeing all these hacker attacks against Twitter, the New York Times, that are being blamed on Syria. Or that basically somebody came forward and said, yeah, we're Syria, we hacked your computers, come and get us, you schmucks. And so I want to reiterate my concern about a virtual 911, which is at the point when they can't keep this economy looking like it's still functioning, the U.S. will crash the computers of the American financial system and blame it on Syria, Iran, Russia, China, whoever, in order to duck the responsibility for what they have done, which is to allow Wall Street predations to run rampant across you, the American people, and look the other way at all the rampant fraud. These are not people who can stand up and accept responsibility for their errors and mistakes and crimes. They're looking for a scapegoat. That's why they're so desperate to start a war. Hate them, hate those, desert people. Hate all those. Don't hate us. We're your government. Hate them. And you need to remember, before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and we are now into big mistake number 3, well and truly. We really, really are. All right, I want to get on to this NSA spying stuff. You thought I was going to forget about Floodgate? Not really. We seem to have become a surveillance society to a rather extraordinarily absurd degree, because apparently the California public schools specifically the Glendale Unified School District. And remember, these districts are all struggling for financing. They don't have enough money for teachers and classroom supplies and everything, but they had enough money to hire an outside company to surveil and spy on their students' Facebook and Twitter accounts. Why is that any business of the school administration, what the kids are doing on their private time in their private lives? They're spending money for these companies to go on out and surveil their own students' Facebook and Twitter posts. What are they going to do with that information? Sell it to marketing companies? Maybe. The marketing companies are already in there. Or are they going to call the students in for counseling because the student expressed doubt about U.S. government policy or something? Are they building a dossier on the students that will be sent to future potential employees to make sure that only obedient sheep who believe what they're told are allowed gainful employment in this country? And I find it especially alarming that we have so many people in the government and corporations and education who don't understand that people exaggerate on social media. It is not a reliable source of raw intelligence on what people are really thinking or saying. It's just another expression of the security industrial complex just going on and spying and selling more spying and more security, and it's just become a power unto itself because of all the money involved. Now, moving on to the economy, we have an article over at Extra Public TV. The Euro system has failed. Actually, all systems based on private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest have failed. But this article is saying the states in the European Union are getting ready to go back to their own national currencies. We know that Germany, quite a while ago, started printing up Deutschmarks and warehousing them in advance of losing the euro or delinking from the euro. And by the way, speaking of Germany, Merkel is out there saying now Greece should never have been allowed to join the euro, because Germany and the German people are getting tired of being looted to pay these unpayable debts. Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, and you're going to love this one, Darrell Lane Woods, the chairman of Columbia, Missouri-based Main Street Bank, got a whole bunch of bailout funds when that whole thing with the mortgage-backed securities was falling apart here, and his bank got the bailout funds. He apparently used much of that money to buy himself a luxury vacation condominium. And he got caught, and he's pled guilty on it. But this is what the bankers are doing. It's just money pouring in from you, the American people. Remember, the whole rationale for the bailouts was take $1 trillion from the American people and give it to the bankers so the bankers can then loan it back to the American people at interest. Such a deal. And it didn't work because the bankers were taking that money and they were putting it in their own pocket. And this case proves it. This guy took his taxpayer bailout money and he bought himself a luxury vacation condominium. And if they caught one, it means there's another 100 out there who didn't get caught. Interesting story from Sense on Sense. Apparently there's been an internal survey over at the Federal Reserve which reveals a serious morale crisis among their employees. And it basically shows the Federal Reserve workforce is completely demoralized. There's no teamwork. Everybody's sort of worried about their turf. Innovation and creativity are being discouraged. The floggings will continue until morale improves. Could you defraud 300 million Americans on a phony, ginned-up scheme and remain entirely cheerful or happy with yourself? Probably not. Those people inside the Federal Reserve understand exactly what's going on. It's a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest to trap the working people in perpetual unpayable debt. And they're taking their big fat paychecks and sitting in their offices to be part of that system, but after a while, I'm sure it has to be catching up with them, and I'm sure probably the management of the Federal Reserve is very concerned about insider whistleblowers going public and saying, yeah, this is all a scam, and the 16th Amendment wasn't ratified. It's all a gigantic hoax perpetrated on the American people to loot them for the private central bankers. By the way, I mentioned Starbucks hiring earlier in the show, and it's a reference to the story. Apparently, Starbucks, which pays their employees minimum wage, In fact, this particular employee in the issue, Colson Loptman, in addition to working at Starbucks, he still has to be on food stamps. Okay? And Starbucks manager caught him retrieving a sandwich that had been thrown in the garbage in the Starbucks and eating it for lunch. And they fired him for it. And the rationale for that was that Starbucks takes the food that's, disposed of, and they very generously hand it out to various food rescue programs, which do exist and they're a good idea. But I understand somebody working at a restaurant who's just barely getting by, helping themselves to a sandwich that maybe somebody didn't eat, and he gets fired? Wouldn't a warning have been sufficient? We have a new mentality of management that, your first mistake is your last. Zero tolerance, no transgression. Over in California, they've been talking about this prison population problem, drastic overcrowding that's led to this hunger strike that's proving a major embarrassment to California across the nation. Now they're going into forced feedings. California has decided rather than try and maybe let some of the inmates with minor offenses go, like smoking a marijuana cigarette, they're going to start building new prisons. The California governor is proposing a massive prison expansion to deal with the problem. We'll be back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is now on TV saying, oh, no, we're not going for regime change. We're just going to punish Assad for killing his own civilians by killing more of those civilians ourselves. And I think the U.S. is trying to create a propaganda view that we just went in to slap him around because he deserved it. But if they can get Assad to shoot back, as Syria has every right to do when they're being attacked, if they can goad Syria into attacking the warships, then it's an attack on the U.S. and Obama can basically go in there. I think that's the whole point of this exercise, to provoke Syria into responding, claim the response is justification for all-out war. Wasn't our fault. We were only punishing him for the gas attack, and he went and attacked our warships. And if Assad won't do it, I'm sure either the U.S. or Israel will. I think that's the plan, what's going on here. We have been talking about stinky badges, and there's yet another one over at Investment Watch blog where apparently police punched a pregnant woman and body slammed her face down on the sidewalk. Think it had an effect on the kid inside? Probably. We are at Nazi Gestapo levels of brutalization of the population. We are there. We are there. The difference is the Germans were convinced somehow they deserved it, and we know better. We, the people of the United States of America, do not deserve how we are being treated. We don't deserve how we are treated by the U.S. government. We don't deserve how we're being treated by the police. We don't deserve how we're being treated by Wall Street and the Federal Reserve. We don't deserve any of it. We did not do anything wrong. We are the victims here. We are as much victims of the war policy as the people over in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, Libya. I've lost track of all the countries we've invaded or regime changed. This war policy is not the work of the United States of America. It's the work of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And as you get out to all these protests that are already organizing across the nation and around the world, that's the message you have to put out. We, the people of the United States of America, are not part of this. We don't support it. We don't agree with it. We know it's all based on lies and deception. How many times do you have to be lied to before you acknowledge you're being lied to? Now, there's an interesting story. This came out of newsforge.com, and it gets back to an issue I was talking about before, where the government, in order to control us, keeps trying to create divisions. Obama's up there already, once again, trying to, whites and blacks, the whites are the oppressors and the blacks are standing for justice. And if that doesn't work, they pit young against old, you know, some group over here, everybody's against the Muslims, men against women. And that was the hallmark of the hijacking of the feminist movement in the 1990s, because the original feminist movement was all about equal pay for equal work, equal access to education, equal access to credit, all very laudable goals, which is why I was an early supporter of the feminist movement. Then it got taken over. And there's a very interesting book on the subject by Christine Hobbs Summers called Who Stole Feminism, that documents how the feminist movement was just completely taken over and to this militant feminism, women should be on top, all men are rapists. And in hindsight, the goal was very, very simple, to craft a society where women were self-sufficient and men were disposable in order to make it easier to send them off to war. And I remember during the late 1990s, there was that whole rape hysteria. It was all over the place, where you had Catherine Comans, the assistant dean of student activity at Vassar, was out there saying a false rape charge is good for men, so come on, ladies. And rape became the second most falsely reported crime in America, according to the FBI supplemental crime statistics. So anyway, apparently there's been a new fallout from that. There's a woman named Elizabeth Page Coast who falsely accused an innocent man of rape and sent him to prison for 4 years. And finally the truth came out. The man has been released after 4 years in prison. Goodness knows what incurable diseases he picked up while he was in there. And as for this woman who sent him to prison for 4 years with a false allegation of rape, she got 2 months in jail. Anyway. Now here's an interesting little fun story. The carbon Nazis, of course, are back here screaming about global warming and carbon taxes, and they're saying Greenland will lose all of its ice cap in 100 years. Because they got embarrassed 10 years ago when they said Greenland will lose all its ice in 20 years, and we're now halfway through that, and Greenland still has all of its ice. So now they put the forecast off until after they're all safely dead and don't have to deal with the embarrassment. And apparently now, and this is a story out of newsforge.com, there is a movement among the carbon Nazis to encourage the World Meteorological Organization to begin naming hurricanes and other destructive storms after people who are climate change deniers. It used to be hurricanes were named after women, and then the feminists said you got to name them after men, and I'm okay with that one. Now they want to basically link the names of the climate change deniers to these horrible destructive storms in order to just cast this negative pall. Oh, it's Tropical Storm Rivero. Look at all the damage he's done. It's a very cheap piece of propaganda. Anyway. Down in Haiti, you probably remember following the earthquake and all the humanitarian aid that was poured in there to build brand new luxury resorts for the money junkies. And either accidentally or maybe not accidentally, there was a strain of cholera that was brought into Haiti by the United Nations workers. And it's still killing people. It's racing through Haiti 3 years on. And it's killed more than 8,000 people and infected more than 600,000. It's an ongoing epidemic. Just think how much more beautiful Haiti will be without those Haitians around. If we're building these brand new luxury resorts, we have to get those Haitians to go away someplace here. Oh, let's see. Interesting story from here in Hawaii. The Hawaii State Election Commission apparently is recommending a $20,000 a year salary increase for the Chief Elections Officer, Scott Nago. This is the same guy who botched last year's election statewide so badly with non-delivered ballots, erroneous ballots, that a lot of Hawaiians didn't get to vote. And for some reason, they think that was such a good thing, they're going to give him a huge, huge raise. And isn't it funny how all the officials tied in with all of this questionable elections always seem to wind up getting promoted? Like the Florida Secretary of State, who just hammered home that whole George Bush bogus victory that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and she got to run for the Senate. I think when you have a questionable election and the people behind it get promotions, it tells you it wasn't questionable. It was fraudulent. And that's another thing we need to get out there to the rest of the world. Don't think the American people support this government because we didn't vote for it. We don't know who actually won these elections because it is engineered to facilitate fraud. One of the earliest electronic voting machines being mandated across the country was from Diebold, which had a reputation for automated teller machines with full audit trails that don't lose a penny from one end of the country to the other. And yet the voting machine created by the same company has at least 12 known ways to get in there and change the outcome of an election. If you have not been there, you should visit blackboxvoting.org, run by Bev Harris, was featured in the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy. It's epidemic. It's not an occasional thing. All of our elections are rigged. They're all fraudulent. We, the American people, have been cut off completely from the political process, which is why we cannot be held responsible for the wars. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and commercial. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here for our third hour. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And please call in. I'm actually almost at the bottom of my talking points. Let's get some conversations going on. How do you feel about this rush to war in Syria? Are you angry with a government that for all of your life has lied to you to get you to do what they want you to do? Because that's all mind control is. There's no magic ray or chemicals or anything like that for mind control. You control the mind by controlling what it knows. That's what propaganda is. Making sure you only have the information that would lead you to decide of your own free will what the government wants you to think. Now, getting back to the United Nations, they're having the meeting over this resolution introduced by Great Britain, and the reason Russia and China are digging in their heels is because Britain has written the resolution to simply say we must protect the Syrian civilians by any means necessary. And the reason Russia and China are digging in their heels is the similar wording was in the resolution regarding Libya. And, of course, immediately, by any means necessary meant let's bomb them because that's what we're good at. And so Russia and China are digging in their heels over that particular wording, and they will not go for it. And, of course, Britain will say, look, we're just trying to help the Syrian civilians by any means. And Russia and China are saying by any means always means going in and bombing them. So there's going to be a fight, and there is a fight. It's already ongoing. And ultimately, Russia and China are going to veto anything that in any way, shape, or form might be interpreted to mean we have UN sanction to go in and start bombing Syria. And again, this is where that revelation that the NSA was spying on the United Nations, which is illegal, by the way, is going to come back to haunt them. Because those people in the United Nations involved with these negotiations are starting out hostile to U.S. interests. And a real question is going to be how many of the people involved in this process are being blackmailed by the NSA because the NSA dug out some dirty little secret about them. Most people, let's be honest, most people have something in their past they would rather not be made public. And if the NSA can ferret that out, then they got you. Unless you have the courage to stand up and say, you're right, I did wallpaper my wife with flocked wallpaper, and I resign. Another article coming out of the media. This is another editorial over in the New York Times. The New York Times is pushing it as hard as they can. How to legitimize intervention in Syria. And they're basically coming out and saying, oh, yes, there's reasons to really be having doubt. But this is, if we follow these steps, if Obama does X, Y, and Z, well, then, of course, an attack on Syria is legitimate. No, it isn't legitimate. You cannot legitimize an illegal act. You cannot legitimize a war crime. It cannot be done. We're getting word now from some foreign sources that Egypt has now closed the Suez Canal to any warships on their way to Syria. Now, this is not going to stop the American ships already in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not going to stop the Russian ships that are coming in through Gibraltar. But it will be a major annoyance to Israel trying to get a Dolphin-class submarine up there with which to play some games. By the way, Dan the Man is now in our control room answering the phones when you call on in at 800-313-9443. Article coming out of Reuters. saying that a brief military action in Syria would limit the risks for Obama. If he just gets in and gets out, nobody's going to raise too much of a fuss. I don't think so, by the way. And they're acknowledging most Americans want no part of a U.S. military intervention in Syria, but they're saying there's some wishful thinking inside D.C. that, you know, Obama's got to do something now. They've committed to this course of action, and they can't simply stop and say, yeah, we made it all up about Assad and his chemical weapons, so he's going to have to do something. So best to get in and get out as quickly as possible. And earlier in the week we were talking about seeking an exit strategy on this failed concept. You know, we made up a lie, we have to do something, let's just get in and smash a few things, get out, declare moral victory and go home, and everybody will forget about it after the Labor Day weekend. And that was one possibility. But there's another player in there, and we are hearing from the Israeli media yet again that the attack on Syria will likely trigger major terrorist attacks against the United States. They're pre-selling. They're going to use false flags to try and escalate this. Israel is not going to allow the U.S. to simply go in with a cruise missile attack and leave. Israel will do whatever it takes to escalate this situation. We could see a replay of the USS Liberty and the USS Cole where Israel blows up, attacks U.S. warships, and blames some other party for it. They've done it before. No reason for them not to do it now. We're going to grab a phone call here. Dan in Washington. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to echo your point on the importance of getting out and showing the non-support of this government agenda in Syria this weekend. And I wanted to ask your opinion as far as I heard back in June that they signed this security pact to have the 15,000 Russian troops here to provide security for the mass events or a catastrophic event.
No.
Have you heard about that?
I heard the story floating around here. They're Russian troops, because up until recently we were buddy-buddy with Russia. Russia would send troops to the U.S. for training. The U.S. would send their troops to Russia for training. They were here in Hawaii for RIMPAC playing tourists. But we understand Putin would never authorize the use of Russian military forces against the American people, because right now Putin understands that the American people are absolutely aligned with this idea of not letting these wars go any further. And so, no, there are not going to be Russian troops in the streets of America shooting at Americans. Putin is relying...
That was kind of my point, is how that's no less absurd than Assad using chemical weapons on his people, knowing that we're on the verge of war with Russia. Why would this agreement be made? That makes absolutely no sense.
No, it's part of the Russia bashing. It's trying to get Americans...
playing a good cop, bad cop routine. I mean, I'm just curious what Russia's reaction will be, because as far as I'm concerned, and you said it many times, they could win this war without firing a single shot. No. All they've got to do is collapse our economy. They've just got to continue to do a ramp up what them and China have been doing and collapse the dollar. Necessarily, they don't have to fire a shot. So it'll be interesting to see, because it looks like Obama's going forward with what he's doing. It'll be interesting to see what their reaction is.
Well, like I said, we're coming up on the G20. And the main agenda there is going to be abandoning the U.S. dollar as the global trade and reserve currency. China's already got direct currency swap treaties with 8 countries. The BRICS nation are putting together their own trade and reserve currency. And that's why the U.S. is trying to gin up this war and get it going right now to project nuclear threat over the rest of the world, saying you will go on using the dollar or we will nuke you. They are that desperate.
Yeah. But when the BRICS nations announced that, they also announced their desire for a world government. So whether it's a power struggle on who controls the world government or not, I don't know. I mean, there's so many angles. I've only been awake to this for 2-3 years, a lot less than you. But so that's why I always value your opinion on this stuff. But I just really wanted to reiterate that it's very important that we show that we do not support this agenda in Syria, and I hope everybody gets out to do that.
Yeah, it is very, very important. And, yeah, Putin is not going to send Russian troops to help the U.S. government put down the American people, because Putin and the American people are in accord with the urgency of stopping this rush to war before it really does get completely out of hand. And that's...
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, we got you there. All right, we're coming up on another commercial break. I know we have another caller, Rich, on the line. I'm going to have to come back to you after this next commercial break. But again, at this point, from the point of view of Washington, D.C., they have to go for the whole thing now. They can't break it up in little tiny steps. They're going to go for the whole thing by hook or by crook. We'll be right back. Aloha, welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Rich in Florida. Aloha, Rich, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, it's Rick. Hey, I'm just calling to say that, what's crime going to translate into when gasoline is $8 a gallon? We don't have to worry about being invaded by another country. All you have to do is cut off our credit score. When 70% of the economy is on consumption and 30% is on production, I think Argentina's economic implosion will be nothing in comparison to what we're about to experience.
Oh, I absolutely agree. When it falls apart, it is going to be very, very bad here, and that is why everybody needs to be preparing to survive 2 to 3 months of confusion while we scrape out the remains of the old banking system and the government and restart up again. And again, look at the Soviet Union when it collapsed and how long it took them to get back on their feet and start the new Russian republics, which are doing very well right now. It's a very happening place over there.
Mike, what do you think crime's going to translate into? What do you think we're looking at?
By crime, you mean street crime?
Yes, sir.
Well, people are going to be desperate. The people who are not preparing to deal with this, and that unfortunately includes a lot of Americans who can't set food aside for an emergency because they're not even getting enough to eat right now. And yeah, it's going to be a reality that society. There's going to be a great deal of social disorder, and you need to be prepared to deal with that. Which is another reason why every American should have a firearm in their home to protect themselves, because you got TV shows advertising who the preppers are, and the people, they get hungry, they replay that DVD and say, oh, let's go on down to Joe's farm here because he's got an underground bunker packed with food. And, we may see the government still trying to struggle to maintain control, send around crews to grab all the food from those of us who've got it stored up, to say we have to redistribute it to those in need, meaning the troops that are keeping us in line. I mean, we're going to go through a tremendously bad period. There's no way to avoid it. But it's going to be short, and again, we need to study very carefully what the Russian republics did when they recovered from the collapse of the Soviet Union. We need to learn what they did right, like state control of their central bank. We need to look at what they did wrong and avoid those mistakes. But we know the money junk...
I'm sorry, lastly, what are we going to do about, the logistics, how are we going to go about putting these people in prison, the bankers, the people that have been doing this to us?
Well, I don't know that we even really need to put them in prison. All we need to do is make them poor. That's a far worse punishment. Just kick them out in the street and say, you try being homeless and hungry for a little while. See how you like it. I'm more concerned with revising the system itself. And I understand from a certain point of view that grabbing the guilty and holding a revolutionary tribunal serves a purpose in that it will send a deterrent message to future generations. The reason we're in this mess that we're in right now is we've had president after president after president who got away with war crimes and was never held to account for them. We have had Wall Street CEO after Wall Street CEO who looted the nation to make themselves billionaires and got away with it. And that definitely has to stop. And again, when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, I think it's very important that we return to that original wisdom of the Founding Fathers, that power has to be dispersed across the country. Because the instant you allow political or economic power to concentrate in one single location, it becomes a target for every sociopathic, money junkie control freak in the nation. And they will do anything to get control of that power, and once they have that power, they'll do anything with it they feel like doing. Obama being a good example with Syria.
This is so liberating to hear you. I've been following you for a while now, but, the absence of your message in the mainstream media tells me everything I need to know about how valid your observations are.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I've actually got somebody over at CBS News who sends me some of their stories in the hope that I will link them to what really happened and drive some traffic back to CBS. And I sent him my logic about Syria's Assad. Do you really think he's stupid enough to invite in the inspectors and throw a chemical weapons attack right in front of them. And this guy kept coming back saying, well, isn't it possible? Couldn't it even slightly be possible? I kept saying, no, it's not possible. And so we know the corporate media is all controlled on this. And you're absolutely right. As far as corporate media exposure, it's virtually non-existent. I mean, there used to be articles about me over at WikiLeaks. Those have all been erased. The corporate media and the propagandists, they just kind of sort of hope that, I'm going to remain invisible. But, I'm not. I mean, the podcasts get picked up from the server. They get spread around the world. Stuff goes viral. I know the video that was made around All Wars or Banker Wars is, at least according to YouTube, it's up to over 300,000 views right now. And it could even be more than that, but we know that YouTube does, in fact, tinker with the numbers on videos they don't want people to really get a look at. So, yeah, I mean, the whole system is completely corrupted. It's all about control. It's all about maintaining the propaganda illusion, and it is failing miserably. And I commented earlier in the week how incredibly stupid it was for the U.S. government, especially on the heels of the lie about Saddam's nuclear weapons, to try it again with Syria. They apparently, inside the Beltway, they really do think Americans have no memory and that we're really stupid enough to fall for the same lies over and over again. And it must have come as something of a shock to just see how the world stood up and said, you're lying. We know you're lying. We're not going to be polite and sit here and pretend to believe the lies any longer when these lies lead to the death of so many innocent people. We know you're lying. The burden of proof is on the government, and of course they keep coming up short. And this government, the federal government of the United States of America, is effectively crippled with the burden of the accumulated lies over the last 2 centuries that they have to maintain, because no incoming administration can say, yeah, you're right, they lied to you about Kennedy, it was a CIA, Israeli, organized crime, Federal Reserve conspiracy. They have to maintain all of the old lies in order that their new lies be believed or trusted in and believed by the American people. And eventually you reach a point where carrying the weight of all those lies becomes a major, major liability for the government itself. And I think we've hit that point, because all those lies are catching up with the government right now. That's why nobody bought this story about Assad. And very clearly, the government has lost the trust of the American people. The American people are very skeptical, which is a very, very good thing. And that's why I am very concerned that when they launch this attack into Syria, they're going to try and do something to just escalate it to go after all the remaining targets at once. I think we're right on the verge here.
Well, I certainly hope that the people understand that the United Nations is just as bad as the bankers if they're not one and the same entity. And I hope we start speaking out about it. And I hope that when the blueprint for a new America starts to take shape and starts to formulate, that we all get out there and we all do our part to make this country what it should be.
Well, 2 things you can do right now. Obviously, it's very important for all Americans to get out there and make as much noise as they can, that we're not buying these stories about Assad, that we do not support this war, we do not support this government, we withdraw our consent from them, as set forth in the Declaration of Independence, and we will not be the wallets of last resort for all the ongoing crimes and scams of Wall Street. We're done. It's not even a question of whether we are willing or not to go on sacrificing to prop up Wall Street. We don't have it. Wall Street succeeded. They've got all the money of the country inside their little vaults there. There's no more out here for them to paper over any more losses. So the system's at the edge of breaking, and that's why they're trying to get the war going.
Great show, Michael. You got us on the edge of our seat. Stay motivated.
I will certainly do my best, and we're going to be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha. Welcome back to the show here. And these are definitely dark times. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Last half hour to get a chance to get in here with your 2 cents worth, or in these inflationary times, 18 cents worth. There's a story floating around that I want to put the scotch on right now. And the headline reads, Putin orders massive strike against Saudi Arabia if West attacks Syria. This is a revival of the big lie. Oh, that Russia, he's going after Saudi Arabia. Why? Doesn't make any sense at all. Even if Putin was considering something like that, and I don't think he is, he certainly wouldn't make it public. This is just more Russia bashing. They're trying to find some way to demonize Russia, because when this war gets going, we're going to wind up in war with Russia and China. And they really do have nuclear weapons of mass destruction and the missiles with which to deliver them. And I'm not buying this story that Putin is ordering massive strike against Saudi Arabia. If he's going to order a massive strike against anybody, it'll be against Israel. Now, I got an email asking a very pointed question when it comes to the discussion about the possibility of Israel sneaking into the Mediterranean with one of their Dolphin-class submarines armed with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles and sinking a U.S. warship. Would it be just as effective to sink a Russian warship, to get the Russian fleet and the American fleet shooting at each other? Yeah, that'd get the war really going. And remember, Israel would absolutely love it if the United States and Russia destroyed each other in a nuclear war, because that would leave Israel and their nuclear arsenal projecting power over the Middle Eastern oil fields, and through that oil, exerting financial control over the rest of the planet, pretty much. Do not for a second think that Israel would moan and groan about the loss of the United States. Yeah, they wouldn't be getting U.S. dollars, but those are on the verge of being worthless anyway. Israel would be a world power with their acknowledged nuclear arsenal if the United States and Russia were out of the way, and China. So yeah, very real possibility that somebody might attack the Russian ships to get them shooting at the Americans and get the Americans shooting at the Russians. That's how wars get started. Trickery and fraud. Over at Haaretz, there's an op-ed there that's joining the chorus of people saying Obama needs to assassinate Assad. Forget about all this other stuff. We have to go for a decapitation strike. Kill Assad. Let the rebels take over. All righty, we're going to have a phone call here. Frank in Michigan. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Frank Redfield, your gay friend.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Doing fine. You sent in the photo for the video, right?
The gay couple.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought.
Yeah, we've been together 40 years. Listen, I'm just telling all my friends on Facebook that your program has become the revolution, like Central, that everybody should tune in every day to your show to find out what the latest, on how things are going. And it's just happening by itself, isn't it? I mean, we really don't have to do anything for the revolution, and we just have to be peaceful and let it all collapse and try to avoid World War III, if possible, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Common sense is going to tell you, never fight the war the enemy is already prepared to fight and win. And we know the U.S. government has been buying all these armored vehicles, hollow point ammunition. They're getting all of these, they call them personal defense weapons. If they have it, it's a personal defense weapon. If you have it, it's an assault rifle. And they're handing them out to all these government agencies like the National Weather Service, like somebody's going to kick down the door over a botched weather forecast or something like that. They're prepared to deal with a violent American uprising, so the best strategy is not to give them one.
Yes, and what is this business about the Justice Department granting amnesty to past and present war criminals? Is that where did you hear that one?
I've got the link from whatreallyhappened.com. They've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now, and today the Department of Justice said, yes, these members of the Bush administration are given procedural immunity, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to ignore any subpoenas or summons or warrants presented against these individuals. And I'm sure, in Germany, their courts did exactly the same thing for the Nazi leadership.
Right, it includes Obama, amnesty for Obama and everything he does.
No, it doesn't. Obama technically can't give himself amnesty. He is relying on Hillary Clinton coming in and retroactively indemnifying him the way that Obama did to George Bush.
Great. He can't do it by executive order or anything.
No, well, he probably will try, but it's not legally binding. He's already off the reservation with executive orders. He's completely misusing those.
Oh, God. Listen, Buck, you've got me so excited. I'm doing everything in capital letters on Facebook, and people say, well, you're so excited. I say, I have reason to be excited. I mean, look what the hell is going on around here.
Yeah, this is not a time to be silent.
No.
If you're staying silent, you are part of the problem.
Very good. Keep it up, Mike. I'll let you go.
All right, I'll do my best. We're going to switch over to Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple things. Since this is the 50th official anniversary of I Have a Dream, back in '99, November, December, the King family hired William Pepper, who's I think a British veteran and attorney, to conduct their own trial regarding the fact that James Earl Ray was the patsy straw man for that event, MLK's murder. So they invited the mainstream propaganda media. They refused to cover it. So they produced a book called An Act of State. Act of State. I wish you would interview William Pepper sometime. And I remember the first time I turned into your program, you cited a friend of yours who is, or I guess he's a retired FBI guy or some intelligence community guy. Because that's not the only book regarding U.S. government assassination activity. Colonel Dan Marvin authored Expendable Elite. You know, I don't know if you ever interviewed Colonel Dan Marvin.
No, I haven't. And were we not, you know, completely absorbed with this threat of World War III, he'd be a very interesting guest on the show. What we do have a page at our website. In fact, I did link it today in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of I Have a Dream, where, looking back, it is very obvious that James Earl Ray was the patsy. He was convicted solely on a confession that he was coerced into making and then immediately retracted, and the judge said, "Too late, you've confessed, you're going to jail." And the information we have at that page I linked to whatreallyhappened.com. You remember that famous photo where King is on the ground and everybody's pointing off in the direction, and we have been told over and over again they're pointing to the window of the rooming house where James Earl Ray was staying. And there was a citizen investigator, Ted Wilburn, who is sadly no longer with us, went back to the Lorraine Motel before they tore it all up and changed it into the new museum, and he took photos that proved that the witnesses to the shooting were pointing over at the rooftop of the building next to the rooming house. They weren't pointing it to where we were told James Earl Ray was. We know that the bullet that killed Dr. Martin Luther King had a gouge in it. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards here. We know that the rifle that was that James Earl Ray had, that was supposed to be the murder weapon, had a manufacturing defect that created huge, noticeable gouges in the bullets fired from it. The bullets removed from Dr. Martin Luther King did not have that gouge. And James Earl Ray's whole case for a retrial rested on that ammunition, and the FBI came back and said, oh, well, the gun wasn't cleaned properly. And then they simply stalled, holding new ballistic tests until James Earl Ray died in prison. Then the judge said nobody else has standing to challenge the official story, and that was the end of it. So this stuff has been going on time and time again. We know Kennedy was shot from multiple directions. We know that more bullets were fired in the assassination of Robert Kennedy than were explained by Sirhan's gun, including a gunshot from the rear of Robert Kennedy. So this stuff has been going on, and they keep lying to you, just hoping that you will believe blindly that government is good and would never lie to you about these things. But we've come to understand in this age, our government is no more truthful than any other government in history. Our government is no more good and wholesome and honest than any other government in history. Look at what all these other governments have done, up to and including Nazi Germany, and realize our government is exactly the same.
It is, brother. It is, and that's why they're buying up all... I can't even get 22... I wanted to get a 22 Magnum rifle. They're not available, nor is the ammunition.
Oh, and now for the guns and ammo that's out there, they're going to raise the taxes. 20% increase on the tax on guns, 50% increase on the tax on ammunition. They don't want you to have guns because they're afraid of you. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our show today. And just a quick program note, I will be continuing on into the first hour of John Stadmiller's show. John is just as concerned and worried about what's going on with Syria and the potential for this thing to just be pushed forward into an all-out global war. And he's asked me to basically share the microphone with him, so you may want to stick around and tune in for that. Little reminder, remember, just put this up at whatreallyhappened.com. Operation Northwoods. This was a plan that was created inside the U.S. government, and it went almost all the way to the White House before somebody said, this is really stupid. And it was a plan to shoot down an airliner and blame it on Cuba in order to justify a new invasion of Cuba. And, of course, it was refused and canceled because the agreement that John F. Kennedy had made with Khrushchev was the U.S. would do hands-off on Cuba, because if the U.S. ever invaded Cuba again, the immediate response from Russia would be all-out war. And it was a secret deal, and Kennedy kept it, Johnson kept it, and up to this point where Operation Northwoods, where all those CIA and Cuban exiles said, we got to come up with an excuse, we can take Cuba, would have meant immediate war with Russia. And they had this plan, Operation Northwoods. And this is the way the government thinks. We will create some incident, blame it on the other guys, and then use it to attack them. And so it's nothing new. What they did with Saddam's nuclear weapons, what they're doing with Assad and his chemical weapons, it's the way these wars get started. All war is based on deception. When a world leader wants to start a war, he has to lie and trick his own people into it to get it going, to make it seem necessary and essential, that there's no possibility of any other course of action but war. And they're trying to do it to you again here. Another poster we put up there, this is a YouTube video. It's actually an audio with a still photo. This was a recording made of Donald Rumsfeld back in 2008. And you need to listen to it, because in this meeting he's kind of hemming and hawing and trying to sort of go around the issue. But the intention is he's saying Americans have forgotten all about 9/11. They're not scared. You know, and how advisable and wonderful would it be if there was a new 9/11 to get Americans back onto that whole war policy. That's how they think. And I'm sure they're thinking about it right now. We just had that story coming out of the Israeli media about the attack on Syria will provoke massive terror attacks inside the United States. Get you all riled up again to go in the direction they're trying to herd you. As far as I absolutely read the situation, that knowing they can no longer successfully lie us into supporting any more wars, that they're going to take this Syria attack and they're going to go for it all. Syria, Iran, everywhere else, all over the globe, war with Russia, war with China. They're going to kick it off. All to protect that little piece of paper with ink all over it. Syria has asked the United Nations to immediately investigate 3 new chemical attacks that have occurred since the 20th. One on the 22nd, one on the 24th, and one on the 25th. In Jobar, Sana'a, and Al-Bahira. And, again, some kind of toxic chemical gas against the Syrian army. And Assad is saying, go in and check it out. Go in and look at it. But remember, Ban Ki-moon has told this investigating team, they're only allowed to determine if chemical weapons were used. They are forbidden to investigate who did it. Because remember, last May, when there was another chemical attack that was blamed on Assad, and the United Nations went in and they said, it was the rebels. The rebels did it. Well, they're not going to be allowed to do that now. Amazing stuff here. Another little article, and I think this comes under the heading of the trying to demonize Russia. This was over at Voice of Russia, where there's a Russian-Ukrainian volunteer corps going to Syria to fight alongside Assad against the rebels. And maybe there really are. But I think they're pushing this story out there because they're out there trying to demonize Russia right now against the possibility we're going to wind up in a war with them. And I think when those warships start launching those cruise missiles, there'll be an attack on those warships by an unknown party. Or possibly even an attack on both a U.S. ship and a Russian ship, getting shooting with each other. Now, the Arab League, while at least tacitly going along with this story about Assad gassing his own people, still voted to refuse to support a military strike. They are not supporting it. And, of course, this is another blow for Obama, who was trying to create this idea that everybody around Syria agreed they should be attacked, and outside of Saudi Arabia and Israel, he doesn't have that now. Absolutely does not have it. As that caller said, the gun grabbers are still out there. They're trying to tax ammunition and guns to the point where only the rich can afford them. They're trying to figure out some way to take the guns away from you. Gun grabbers always like to say, when you take the guns away, the suicide and death go down. There's a new Harvard University study, which is actually released in the spring and got zero media attention, and basically it proves the gun grabbers are wrong. Banning firearms does not reduce murder, because murderers find other means of doing so, and the criminals certainly don't obey the gun laws. They're criminals. And it doesn't reduce suicide, because people who are desperate enough to commit suicide or their brains are completely fried on the SSRIs, they'll find something else to do, leap off a building and hit the pedestrians below. There is no credible evidence that taking guns away from law-abiding citizens makes them safer. Quite the contrary. The evidence is overwhelming. It opens up the society for criminal predation. When Britain banned all their guns, they were telling the British people, you're going to be safe, you're going to be safe, you're going to be safe. The crime stats went right through the roof. Britain kept their gun ban on the excuse that even though the British people weren't really safer, they felt they were safer, they were convinced they were safer, and therefore they were going to keep the gun ban. That's pretty lame. That's pretty lame here. I normally don't go into celebrity news, but there was a certain amount of visceral satisfaction about this. Remember all those Girls Gone Wild videos and TV commercials? They were everywhere. Girls Gone Wild, where this guy would go out and convince girls, 18 and older, although in one case he got busted on that, to get naked and fool around for his video camera. And they weren't being paid. They were just being, filled full of all kinds of booze. And they'd get crazy on video, and he'd sell the videos. And he made a fortune, has a mansion in Bel Air. Or had. I don't know if he still has it. Anyway, he apparently took 3 women to his house and assaulted them, and he's just been sent to jail for that. And I'm sure that assault will be in the next video of Girls Gone Wild. Alrighty, we're coming up here on the top of the show, and again, I'm going to be staying on the mic to share the microphone with John Stadtmiller into the first hour of his show. Dan in the control room said that the guy who did the Girls Gone Wild videos also owns a small island in the Bahamas. Boy, I'm in the wrong line of work here. Instead of doing all this get the truth out and stop the wars, I should have just been going out and making videos about naked, crazy college girls. But back on a serious note, and again reiterating what we said before, you cannot stay silent right now. We're on the verge of all of these little wars gelling together into a truly global war. We're at the brink. This is as serious as it gets. The money junkies are desperate to get this world war going to save them from their little Ponzi scheme, central banking scam collapsing, because they've done it twice before. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, World War III. That's the pattern, over and over again. And we cannot be suckered into it one more time. We have to break the historical pattern. And what you need to do, protests are forming all over the country. And you need to find one or create one and get out there in front of your friends and neighbors and say, no, we the people of the United States of America withdraw our consent from the federal government when it comes to these wars and lies to sell the wars. So, we're going to take a break here for Phyllis Shapley and news. John and I will be back here in a few minutes after the commercials. And aloha, America.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the National Intel Report. I'm your host, John Stadtmiller, with you today on this 28th day of August, 2013. It must be pretty bad, ladies and gentlemen. It must be a hard row to hoe when you have people like Rumsfeld coming out and saying the administration hasn't justified a Syrian attack. Mr. Shock and Awe himself. I have Mike Rivero with me. WhatReallyHappened.com is his site. Hello, Michael.
Aloha.
How are you?
I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I think, like everybody else, I'm very concerned and worried, because if they get this world war going and we get to war with Russia and it goes nuclear, I've got a ringside seat for a first strike nuclear target right here.
And what would that be?
Pearl Harbor.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness, I forgot all about that.
There's
yes,
a
you
big
are down
Navy
that...
base down there with all those big ships and everything out there. There's going to be a blinding flash of light, and 12 seconds later I won't have to worry about retirement.
Well, as God once asked Noah, don't build that ark. How long can you tread water? that would be a big swim for you to try to get out of the Central Pacific there.
Well,
Look,
I don't swim. I'd have to take one step, come up for air, take another step, come up for air, and it probably would take me a while to get back to the mainland.
Good luck with that one. Look, I've been on the road here and out of the loop, and I've been in and out of, yes, impending World War III is going to take place. We have some house people. I mean, seriously, Rumsfeld saying that they don't have justification. What the hell justification did they have going into Iraq? Either time. That's a good question. But we've got 107 House members as of 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. We have 107 House members saying Obama needs approval from Congress on Syria. Didn't Congress give up that right to George Bush on declaring war?
No, they didn't. They passed an authorization for force for that case only in Iraq. And by the way, George Bush did lie to Congress in his letter of transmittal activating the authorization for force. But after Korea and Vietnam, Congress passed the War Powers Act, which doesn't actually enable the president to go to war. It actually set limits on him. And the president can order the military forces into action only with a congressional declaration of war or some other form of congressional authorization, as was the case with George Bush, or when the United States itself is attacked, which it hasn't been. Syria has not attacked us. Iraq did not attack us. And the president does not have the authority to simply send the military into other people's countries. There's no basis in domestic law for it. There's no basis in international law for it. We have a president who is out there publicly saying he doesn't care that the American people don't want the war. He doesn't care that Congress doesn't want the war. He's going to ignore the United Nations. He's going to ignore NATO, because there is no, even the Arab League has voted against this. And Obama is out there saying, I know I'm right, I have to go on and move forward with this.
Well, and now we're down to the talking points on the Neocon network, Fox News, and bringing up everybody imaginable saying, yes, okay, well, it may be a preemptive strike, but we may only strike for 24 hours or 48 hours. We have some people out there calling for the head of Alfredo Garcia, Mr. Assad. By the way, kill his whole damn family if you can. We've got information out there floating around. If the U.S. attacks Syria, well, Iran's going to turn around and attack Israel. Michael, let me ask you a question. If we know, you're down in Hawaii. Yes. I'm here in Central Texas. We're two individuals. We know that Israel has many multitudes of nuclear weapons. Some people put it as high as 400. We know Israel has the ability to launch nuclear weapons. It would be an act of insanity for Iran to say publicly that, well, if you go after Syria, we're going to go after Israel. Israel would turn them into a glass parking lot.
Well, that's absolutely true, but I think what's going on here is I think the government was caught almost entirely by surprise that the American people and the rest of the world did not buy into this claim about Assad inviting in the UN chemical weapons inspectors, and then on the day they arrived, launched a chemical weapon attack on women and children virtually in front of them. Right. And so I think the idea of grabbing Syria, waiting a few months, and then going into Iran is not going to work. They understand they will not be able to come up with any convincing lie to launch a war against Iran. And my concern is that as soon as they start shooting in Syria, despite all this talk about only 24 or 48 or 72 hours, which it's up to now, that somebody is going to work to find some way to escalate the war and basically just go for the whole remaining objective on this whole situation. We know that Germany has admitted, they've known for years, Israel arms those Dolphin-class submarines Germany gives them with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. And because of what Israel did before with the USS Liberty, trying to sink the ship and blame Egypt for it, I would not at all be surprised for Israel to have one of their Dolphin submarines in the eastern Mediterranean and either send a torpedo or a nuclear cruise missile against those U.S. warships as they're launching cruise missiles against Syria, and then try and blame it on Syria and say, oh, Iran did have nuclear weapons, they gave one to Syria, Syria used it against our warships, it's now an attack against America, and Obama, under the War Powers Act, can then escalate it. I think they're going to go for the whole thing right now because they can't do it piecemeal anymore. The world is fed up, the American people are fed up, and I think this is such a dangerous situation. They're just going to try and get this thing going for real.
You know, I'm no fan of military coup, but let me tell you something. I hope that we have real patriotic Americans. This sounds like 7 Days in May.
Yes.
I hope that we have real patriotic Americans, that if this asshat, and I'm referring to the character right now, operating out of the Oval Office, Mr. Sartoro, I hope to God that before this man puts his finger on a nuclear button or gets us literally into World War III, I would hope, and I know this is a dangerous thing to say, because military coups, you never know how these things are going to turn out and who's going to be demanding of whom what. But in this particular case, if this character tries to go nuclear, I hope they jerk him out by his short hairs.
Well, I would tend to agree that some kind of an intervention is definitely needed. Now that Obama is clearly operating outside the authority of the presidency and outside of both domestic and international law, clearly there are grounds for somebody to go in and slap the handcuffs on him. By the way, a little side note about 7 Days in May. That was actually based on a real attempted coup against Roosevelt by the Wall Street bankers in 1933. And they had Major General Smedley Butler sort of as the figurehead, but he blew the whistle on them. When it was made into the movie, of course, they took out the whole thing about the bankers and they made the military guy the bad guy. But it's actually based on a true story.
That I was not aware of. And which was the good guy? Was it Burt Lancaster or the other guy?
No, Burt Lancaster was the bad guy, the military general who was behind the coup that was sort of playing the role of Smedley Butler. But Smedley Butler didn't go forward with the coup. He blew the whistle to the Congress and to Roosevelt. And they had to hush it all up because the bankers said, we're going to just crash the New Deal if you don't shut up about this.
All right, let's take the break here. I got a hard break to take. We'll come right back. Michael Rivero is with us. We want to get the lowdown here for you out there on the Middle East. Yippee, here we go again, only this time it might be the Mac Daddy. We know things are not all roses between Pootie Poo and Obama. I think Vladimir Putin would like to take Obama out behind a woodshed and just whoop his butt. He's a no-nonsense, straightforward kind of guy. He doesn't pull his punches. But rumor is, Mr. Rivero, that if we attack Syria, they're going to go after Saudi Arabia?
I have serious doubts about that story. And remember, truth is the first casualty of war. And we're already, first of all, starting with that nonsense about Assad and his chemical weapons. There was a report out that Assad had already fled Syria for Iran. That's already been denied. You have to ask yourself, why would Putin consider Saudi Arabia a target? And even if he did, why would he make that public? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. But we had an email from a listener in Great Britain to my show basically coming in and saying that over in Great Britain, the media is just all about bashing Russia. They've already moved beyond Syria and Iran, and it's all about the Russians are bad, the Russians are in the way of us accomplishing what we need to do. And I'm very concerned that this ultimate plan to force Bretton Woods back on the rest of the world does include conflict with Russia and China, because remember, we're coming up on that G20 meeting in St. Petersburg, and we already know a major part of their agenda is going to be dropping the dollar as the global trade and reserve currency, which will mean the end of the American banking system. And so if the U.S. gins up a war against Russia between now and then, and we're only talking a couple of weeks, then all of a sudden the G20 is dissolved, and that's the end of talking about replacing the dollar as the global reserve currency. We already know that China has signed direct currency trade deals with 8 nations without going through the dollar. The BRICS nations are setting up their own trade and reserve currency. This war is all about propping up the dollar. And the problem the United States government faces is over the last 30, 40 years, they got lazy. They had so much money coming in simply because everybody had to go through the dollar in world commerce. They allowed our manufacturing to decline. They've inadvertently destroyed our agricultural exports with this horrible GMO experiment. And the only thing they can think of doing to sort of keep things going is to just drag the world back to Bretton Woods, even though the world abandoned Bretton Woods after Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility back in 1970.
And these Muslims, as evil characters as they are, isn't it amazing, Michael, that they do not believe in modern-day banking or otherwise usury?
Well, it's not just the Muslims. Ancient Christians believed exactly the same thing, and the reason they took that position is they saw how loaning money at interest had brought down ancient civilizations, including Rome itself. And so the ancient Christians and the ancient Muslims forbade that, and the Christians stayed with it until the time of the Templars, who were able to sort of work around it by calling it renting of money. And, of course, as soon as the Templars were allowed to practice what is still today many of the modern banking practices, it took only a decade to plunge Europe into unpayable debt. And the funny thing is, I actually have a Master of the Temple from Portugal in my family tree, which I used to take a great deal of pride in. But looking at how they almost wrecked Europe, I'm coming to understand why King Philip the Fair did what he did. And those Templars, they kind of had it coming for this predation banking practices. And now we're in a situation where right now the United States economy has been destroyed by the very same sort of private central bank we fought a revolution to be free of. We're back into the slavery of it, and worse, using American force of arms to try and drag the rest of the world into that same system, even though clearly it doesn't work for the people in the nation. Every nation under a private central bank, all across Europe, all across America, they're all in trouble, trillions of dollars in debt, and none of those trillions ever really existed in the first place. It's just a bookkeeping entry to keep us slaves.
Well, and what is England saying exactly that, there's obstacles of getting the job done? What's job number one in Syria? To go after him because Assad gassed his own people? I just got a report here that the UN inspectors are in there going, no, it wasn't Assad's army that had anything to do with any kind of gas. It was the opposition forces. So now there's a counter-argument, but evidently there's a lot of panicking and a lot of vinyl sucking up off the chairs in Washington, D.C., because this guy's ready to push the war button.
Well, it is, and there's a lot of people going with him. I mean, Representative Peter King was out there saying that, yes, the president has a right. He's got to go, and we've got McCain and Graham are out there saying that if the president doesn't attack Syria, it will damage the credibility of the White House because it'll show the world the president doesn't mean business when he says we have to go to war. Any lame excuse they can come up with to keep moving this forward when it is very obvious the entire world understands this was another lie, just like Saddam's nuclear bombs. UN won't support it. NATO won't support it. Arab League won't support it. It's a violation of U.S. and international law, and still Obama is moving forward because if they don't go out there and complete this capture of the world's resource-rich areas and forcing them back onto the dollar, the U.S. economy is finished.
It's finished anyhow.
It is finished anyhow, and that's why it's just absurd to risk literally incinerating the face of planet Earth for these pieces of paper with ink on them when it's really not going to affect the final outcome of this system.
Well, and we have, look, the media, I heard the media today. First thing, you listen to the narrative, and when you hear them repeat a phrase 4 or 5 or 6 times within the body of a report, that's what you folks, and this is a little clue to you, this is what you're supposed to take away from that narrative. I heard this 6 times during one report alone. Well, this is pushing oil prices up. And I stopped, and I just stared at the television set. There's nothing being shipped. There's nothing in storage. So immediately, I guess that little straw that we have sunk into the ground in the Middle East, that gets crimped almost immediately when the drums of war are beating. That's not how this works. But that's how we have been worked over on this deal, and that's another reason. Well, we've got to go in there, we've got to stabilize because we're dependent still after how many years? A half a century of discussing dependency on the Middle East, on their oil. Here we are, ready to go to war. This argument is wearing thin. And to be, Go ahead.
Yeah, it's wearing thin because it isn't the U.S. needing that Mideast oil. It's the U.S. needing that Mideast oil to be sold only for U.S. dollars. 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, the U.S. invades. They lynch Saddam Hussein. Iraq's oil is back on the world market, but only for U.S. dollars. A couple of years ago, Muammar Gaddafi down in Libya introduced the gold dinar and a state central bank and said if you want to buy Libya's oil, you will have to pay for it with gold dinars. U.S. invades. They kill Gaddafi. Libya gets a brand new private central bank, and Libya's oil back for sale, but only for the U.S. dollars. Because that's how the U.S. is funding its economy, with other people's oil. Because any country that wants to buy oil has to come to the United States and bring us products and agricultural produce that we give them the paper tickets for, where they can go get their oil. So America's literally been getting a piece of the action of the oil trade all across the globe. It was called the petrodollar deal, and that was how they salvaged the U.S. dollar after Nixon ended gold convertibility and basically shattered the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the U.S. just got lazy. They've been living off of other people's money and other people's work for so long. Those politicians in Washington, D.C., with rare exceptions like Ron Paul, they don't know how to do anything else except scam and loot the rest of the world, and that's why it's all falling apart. They don't know how to run the business any other way than they've been doing it, even when it's obvious what they're doing is failing.
Well, it's the old model, isn't it?
Yes,
and
it is.
This is a new day. And Michael, I appreciate you coming on the program here. I don't know what it's like to do multiple hours every single day, but I appreciate you coming on because I've been listening to your program the last couple of days. And you've been spot on in the issue here of the Middle East. And believe it or not, there are some people who listen to this network that listen to you and don't listen to me. Who would have thunk it?
Well, that's incredibly poor taste on their part. What the heck is wrong with these people?
Yeah. At any rate, let me take the break here. Bottom of the hour, hard break. We'll come back talking to Michael Rivero here. Visit his website, folks, whatreallyhappened.com. And by the way, he is on this network previous to this show for 3 hours, from 1 to 4 p.m. Central Time. We'll be right back. Donald Rumsfeld coming out and saying Obama he's skating on thin ice. What is the connections here, Mr. Rivero, between Syria and Russia? What is the deal with Iran and Russia and China? What business interests do they have in there? And are they really ready to go to war over commerce?
Well, ultimately all wars are commerce, and of course we have an article and a video that we put out called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, and I just checked at YouTube, and the video for that article has already gone over 300,000 views. Basically, there's a couple of concerns from Russia's point of view. First and foremost, Syria and Iran are major trading partners, and Russia does have strategic interests in those parts of the Middle East and the Middle East resources. Secondarily, Russia understands that the real agenda behind all these wars started by the United States of America is to force the world back to Bretton Woods, and Russia doesn't want to go back to that because it was a deal that basically scammed wealth from the entire planet for the benefit of the Wall Street bankers, and they don't want to go back to that. The United States proved it was untrustworthy. They abused the original Bretton Woods Agreement. And Russia understands that for this whole program of forcing Bretton Woods onto the world, of capturing all the world's resource-rich areas and have them available for sale only for dollars, for it to succeed, it's got to be everywhere. And so Russia understands war is coming, and they remember how close the Nazis got to Moscow. And I think Russia is realizing that if they're going to have to fight a war, they would rather do it as far away from Russia as possible. And not run the risk of letting the front come right up to the edge of their capital city. And so I don't think Russia wants a war, but it's certainly being forced on the world by the United States of America right now, and its lapdogs, France and Britain.
You know, thanks to the Internet, people have a pretty good picture of what the wishes of the American people are. People in Russia, people in the Middle East. You keep seeing this from time to time, Michael. They say that we know how the American people feel, and we don't hate the American people. Their government is out of control, and we understand that. That didn't happen before in this world. before people had the ability to communicate with each other, go across international borders, or news sites that are all over the planet, and you can get different views and different perspectives. In other words, it's not all canned and controlled like it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there was 3 networks. And Michael, I must have filed this away back in my head when I was just a child. 10 years after I was born, they're firing up Kennedy, turning him into human confetti here in Dallas, right up the road, so to speak, from me. And I remember at the time watching the news and that getting my interest. For 3 days, that's all you saw was Kennedy. You saw the narrative being played over and over again. And I'm watching this, and it kind of got me interested in the news. So it's 6:30. Before the evening programming came on, there was only 3 networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. I would watch the news, and I would go from one channel to the next to the next. It was almost the exact same stories being played at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that coincidence? Sometimes that might happen. When I was a younger man, I thought, well, maybe that's due to competition. They want to compete with each other so hard that they're like each other. So here's your choice. Well, you might like the eyes of, if you're a woman, you might like the eyes better or the mouth movements of this talking head other than the other 2 that are talking. But that wasn't it. It was managed and controlled news even back then.
Oh, it absolutely was.
Yeah, now we got 958 million channels. We have all this din of constant babble, you name it. And we are still no closer to having true news than anything else, except for places like this network. We've always tried to be straightforward with people. There are things sometimes that we talk about. They're uncomfortable. People are corporatized in this country. They dare not speak out too harshly or give a critique too harsh because that might mean a loss of revenue, thereby you lose your job. Take a look at what happened to the CNN host. What was his name? Rick, was it Sanchez?
Yes.
That was on an NPR program and talking about, well, who controls what in this country. Literally, after that program aired, an hour afterwards, CNN was thanking Mr. Sanchez for his time on CNN, and we wish him well.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I remember I have a very good friend named Connie Chung that I've known. We haven't connected recently, but I knew her and worked with her at KNXT Channel 2 in Los Angeles many, many years ago. And she was on the scene in Oklahoma City when the Murrah building was bombed. And she asked on air of a fire chief about reports that fire trucks had been deployed around the Murrah building before the explosion happened. And she was gone from CBS the next day.
So how did she get back on? Did she pay penance? What did she do?
I guess she paid penance, and she was married, I think, to Maury Povich. I don't remember correctly, but yeah, she basically came back, and she did have a following and name value. But we know the media is controlled, and it goes all the way back to the end of World War II when the Central Intelligence Agency set up Operation Mockingbird that had as a goal putting CIA assets into all management positions at the TV networks and the major newspapers. And I remember when I was working at CBS Television City in Hollywood many years ago, they actually tried to recruit me at that time, and they wanted me to sabotage the pilot for a game show I was working on so that a rival pilot for a producer who was with the CIA would get the slot and the job and the money. And at that point, I kind of got cold feet, and I said, this has nothing to do with national security and finding the commies and the rest of it. And I walked on that. But we know that CIA does actively control the media. We know the FBI infiltrates and spies on the media. Been all kinds of stories about it. And it goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, who even before he was head of the FBI, was always out there in Hollywood saying, you need to make movies that support the government. And one of his arch enemies was Charlie Chaplin, who was making very popular movies that showed government officials as clueless buffoons. And Hoover tried to get him to stop, and Chaplin said, I'm not going to stop. This is what the audience is paying to see. That's what they're buying the tickets for. And ultimately, Hoover, of course, was instrumental in having Chaplin's citizenship revoked and having him kicked out of the country. Hoover was just a manic about controlling Hollywood and making sure that Hollywood only told the story the government wanted. There's a very famous movie called The FBI Story starring Jimmy Stewart. And Hoover was literally on the set every day telling the director how to direct the movie to get the correct image of the FBI out there into the public. I mean, that's how completely manic they were about this.
You know, it's funny you should mention that, because I have a collection, like a gift package collection of Jimmy Stewart movies. And one of those movies is The FBI Story. Mm-hmm. And I can remember watching that and going, why is this included in this? Because he was so stiff. He looked uncomfortable doing that movie, and I had absolutely no idea the FBI and J. Edgar was on the set.
He's actually in the movie, only from the back. He's seen from the back once in one scene. That was his Alfred Hitchcock moment, I guess.
Jeez, oh, Pete. At any rate, let me go to Scott in Wisconsin. Hello, Scott.
Hey, John. I just was waiting one day. I talked to Michael Rivero. He's a brother to me, and I remember Michael, to share this with John. I used to talk to Michael Rivero way back on GCN, so I would like to share that with Michael. He can reflect that. And I get fired up during the day because I bother him like a desert rat. But, John, you know, this situation over in the Middle East is, I think, what Michael brought up and we talked about in the past about how if they don't get the central bank into these countries, we're coming in with our military. And I think this situation that's so dangerous, John and Michael can listen in, that this is a way that they want to get into Iran. There's no question about it. And this is a way that I think they're, like Michael was saying, and I feel the same way he does right now, that they know that they don't have the finances anymore, and this is the last chance for romance, and they want to go into Syria and get Iran involved. And then once you get Iran involved, then they want Russia to get in there. So this situation is so dangerous of that whole area over there blowing up into a powder keg.
Well,
and I just talked to Michael earlier today about how they just issued gas masks to all the people in Israel.
Yeah, I've been watching it. And by the way, Michael, I wanted to ask you. Yeah, I saw the same clip that Scott did. And their gas masks have fans on them.
They do.
Now, what the hell does that mean? A gas mask with a fan? I've never seen one.
Well, it means the filter element is so thick that you can't get air through it just with your lung power, so it has to have boosting.
Holy mackerel, I want one of those. We'll take the break. We'll be right back.
You're tuned in to the National Intel Report, the real talk radio show.
Twist and shout, twist and shout. No, that's just not the name of a song, 60s song. Actually, it was Chubby Checker back in the 50s, if memory serves. But I'm reading the story, and I already got this from a supposed conservative radio voice, that, they were complaining that, this prime minister over in Russia, he's comparing maybe Obama, and this is really hateful to a monkey. That's not what the deputy prime minister of Russia said. His name is Dmitry Rogozin, I think you pronounce that, Rogozin. He said the U.S., not Obama, he said the U.S. is like a monkey with a hand grenade in the Middle East. That was not. And why not make that statement? Because what are they celebrating with nobody in Washington, D.C. today? MLK Day. Yeah, I had a dream. Well, I had a dream too. I had a dream that we'd put all of this stuff behind us and that we'd be merrily marching off to our graves. You know, we only have a limited time before we have to shuffle off this mortal coil, and we live in some kind of peace and harmony with each other with respect. You know, I've been told, Michael, that, it's really going to be love that saves us all. Look, I don't love a grizzly bear. If this grizzly bear, I encounter one in the forest, I know if I don't do something, he is going to eat me. And I mean eat me. Do I love that bear? Can I love that bear to not attacking? No. What will keep me at a distance and give me an edge is my respect for that bear because I know what he can do. I mean, Michael, I just, the insanity of all of this, and you can feel it ratcheting up, minute by minute, hour by hour. Are we going to go to war, or are we not?
Oh, absolutely, we're going to war. I mean, Obama has literally boxed himself into a position where he has to be seen to do something in Syria, because he's not going to back off and say, yeah, we were just making it up about Assad's chemical weapons and we changed our mind. He's basically created a situation where he has to do something, even though the entire world knows he's operating on the basis of a complete fabrication, much of which is coming out of Israeli intelligence, I might add. The question is going to be, is it just going to be a symbolic wrist slap, or are other parties who are interested in having this war escalate into Iran, Russia, China, wherever else they want it to go, will they use this as a launching platform for some kind of a staged incident to try and get this whole war agenda back on track? And again, we're getting out of the Israeli media, their intelligence services are claiming that when the U.S. attacks Syria, it will result in massive terror attacks across the United States of America. And I don't think that Israel is going to simply sit there and allow Obama find an exit strategy of going in and wrist-slapping Assad and then retiring back home. I think Israel will do everything it can to provoke a much wider confrontation, whether it is going in with a Dolphin submarine and attacking a U.S. warship and blaming Syria and Iran for it, or shooting at a Russian ship to get them shooting at the Americans. But Israel has a past history of these dirty tricks. Lavon affair down in Egypt, blowing up British and American assets, planting evidence to frame Egyptian Muslims. USS Liberty tried to sink it, initially blamed Egypt for that. USS Cole destroyed that, blamed Yemen for it. 9/11, blame all the Muslims for that, and on and on and on. I don't think Israel is going to leave this to chance. I am fully expecting them to launch some kind of a false flag attack at the U.S. forces in the eastern Mediterranean when they start launching missiles at Syria.
And I would almost be disappointed if they didn't, because you're absolutely right. They do have a track history of doing this by way of deception. And the insanity of all of this, that I'm thinking about this, and what I said to you earlier about, well, if the U.S. attacks Syria, Iran is going to go after Israel. Iran is not stupid. They are not a dumb people. And by the way, folks, no matter what you've heard on the media about Mr. Ahmadinejad or Assad over there, you know what? They don't hate Jews. They don't hate Christians. Ask the Jews and the Christians that are now living in Iran right now. They get along famously. There are no problems. The problem is that, Iran, they're trying to create a nuclear weapon. And you know what? Let me play devil's advocate for a second. If they wanted to build a nuclear weapon, I would say let them, because it would be only for defensive use. Guess who has hundreds and hundreds of, and you said it earlier, they have submarines, they have air-to-air delivery systems, ground-to-air, air-to-ground, doesn't matter. Every imaginable delivery system for nuclear weapons they now have in Israel.
They absolutely do.
And this is crazy. It's nuts.
I want to insert a little comment here, and it's a little bit of history, because we're always hearing about the threat from Iran, Israel has been screaming that Iran is months away from a nuclear weapon, going all the way back to 1985, and it is simply not happening. And even if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they'll put it in a museum, they'll march it in the parades and say, we're butch. They're not going to use it because they understand that it would justify immediate attack by the U.S. and Israel. And you need to go back and look at the history of war. Iran has not started a war of aggression in over 200 years. It is not in their nature. They had to defend themselves during the Iran-Iraq War, which was basically the U.S. working through Iraq, trying to recapture Iran after the 1979 revolution. But you look at the United States and Israel, they can't seem to go 6 months without starting a war with somebody. And so of the three nations involved there, the United States, Israel, and Iran, Iran is the least threat to world peace here. And you need to say, again, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, Syria's weapons of mass destruction, Iran's weapons of mass destruction. In all of human history, only one nation has actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and you're standing on it right now, or sitting as the case may be.
That's exactly right. And you're down there in World War II Central, where it was another false flag that got us involved in World War II in the first place against Japan.
That's absolutely right. Roosevelt was following an 8-step plan by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum to provoke and goad Japan into the attack. They knew they were coming. Roosevelt had the information being intercepted on Oahu by Station H and decoded by Station Hypo, and it was ordered sent to the White House but not shared with the Hawaii commanders. All of the modern ships in Pearl Harbor were out of the harbor. There was nothing but a bunch of old junk left here for the Japanese to come in and attack, and it was presented to the American people as a complete surprise attack. And yet it's in the historical record that in February of 1941, Roosevelt was openly discussing with the War Department, let's sacrifice a couple of ships to get us into the war against Japan and Nazi Germany. And that's how these things get started.
This is simply amazing. Look, I know you've been on the air now for 4 hours, but I've got calls loaded up. Can you stick with me?
I can stick with you for one more segment.
Okay. Well, okay, that's going to be 6 after. All right. No, that's fine. Let me get Danny in South Carolina. Hello, Danny.
Hey, guys. Excellent program. This is better than the World Series. I just wanted to throw a little consideration at you. The Israeli visa waiver provision of Senate Bill 462 provides for Israeli citizens to get a entry visa at the airport without the usual paperwork. They just walk into the airport and then they walk into this country. It's been in committee since March, but let me tell you what I really think is going to happen now. This entire Israeli-American Strategic Partnership Act of 2013, otherwise known as Bill 462, whenever this jumps off and all the confusion, they're going to pass this thing on a voice vote. No one will even know it. It won't be debated. It'll be you wake up one morning and it'll be in effect. I do believe that is part of this, this whole mess, because there are certain provisions of the earlier Strategic Partnership Act which will expire this year unless they are renewed, and I'll bet you they're going to sneak it in under everyone's nose. I just wanted to...
I'll look into that, Bill 462. All right.
462, yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate it. Kent in West Virginia. Let me squeeze you in here quickly. Hello, Kent.
Well, I've got a comment, but the previous caller, well, maybe that's just, they'll pass that, and then all the Israelis can flee to the United States when whatchamacallit hits the fan. So. But anyway, well, it's, I think it's printed right on the dollar bill, John. It says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. You know, if you have a little store or something and you refuse to do business with the dollar bill, they'll come in with some dude with a gun and straighten you out about that. And I think that's what's going on around the world, you know. They're bigger guns, missiles. So the dollar bill is backed up by missiles.
There you go. And a whole lot of oil. Or they're at least trying to keep that old broken down system in the plug and play. Is it going to save the economy? No, it's not. It's going to fall apart anyhow. This is a ruse. But they're dying to get us into it, literally. Thanks for your call, Kent. Jerry, Art, just hang on. Top of the hour break. We've got a long segment here. We'll be back in about... Ladies and gentlemen, hour 2 of the National Intel Report on this Wednesday, 28th of August, 2013. Mike Rivero is on with us. What Really Happened is the radio show from 1 to 4 p.m. Central Time, and, of course, the website, whatreallyhappened.com. How long have you had that site, Michael?
Oh, and its present form since I think about 2005, but I actually began, next year will be our 20th anniversary since I started my first political peace activism blog.
20 years. That's as long as I've been behind a microphone.
That's about 1/3 of my life, you know, that I've spent trying to derail this rush to war and fascism.
Well, it's kind of fascinating. By the way, I have to tell you this. Dan, what did you say about Michael here? That you guys listen to the show, and you always find new things out about him, the stuff that he did, and there's something about you guys have to do shots every time he comes up with something that he's done, and you can never finish the night without getting crap-faced, let's just say. Yeah. You got to redo your bio. I'm
going to have to make some stuff up just to make sure they stay sloshed.
Well, yeah, that'd be one way of doing it. But no, doing this hour with you, I had forgotten how smart you were, and I was thinking to myself, this is a really good guest. This guy should have his own show. And then I'm listening to all the stuff that you were doing and the people you know and this, that, and the other. I need a revised bio because you, my friend, need to be on a lot of radio stations. You are the best prepared host that is on this network.
Well, I'm reluctant to. I don't want to get into bragging, and I'm really very shy about talking about myself out of any kind of a context of the immediate situation, because the story really is about trying to prevent the war. The story is it's always the news and stuff, and I don't want to get sucked into what we've seen with so many corporate media personalities where they become the focus and the show is about them, and you start to lose focus on what they're trying to tell you.
I understand exactly what you're saying. Years ago, when I started a network, Republic Radio International, that is now Genesis Communications Network, I said a quiet little fervent prayer, and I'm not a praying guy. I said, keep the love of money out of it and keep the ego out of it.
And you succeeded.
Well, yeah, I would like to think, because I'm not an ego-driven guy. Mm-hmm. I would prefer to be sitting down on one of your beaches right now, drinking one of those little drinks with the little umbrella in it, rather than doing this. But this needs to be done, and I appreciate your due diligence. You prepare for a program during the week as many hours as you are on the air.
Yes.
So that's a lot of hours there, folks. And he is one of the best prepared people that we have on this network. And I want more people. I'm not worried about you getting egotistical. You're getting too damned old for that. You know better.
Thank you. Tomorrow's my birthday. Thank you for reminding me how old I am.
No, that's a Remembrance Day,
yes.
And that was a plot and a conspiracy by some card maker. Mm-hmm. Your mother only birthed you one time, so that's just a reminder day.
Okay.
Jerry in New Jersey. Hello, Jerry.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hi.
Hey, happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you.
Both of you are good, and I love your shows. At any rate, I just wanted to bring up a point about the gas masks being, I guess, distributed to Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that when you're wearing those masks, it's hard to breathe. It's like breathing through a straw. And if you're not used to wearing those things, you're going to get claustrophobic. You're going to want to tear that mask off.
So it's just for civilian use as long as you're sitting still, and if you're moving, it's not worth a damn because you need to breathe?
Well, the thing is, if you're going to wear that, you better get out of the area, too. You know what I mean? It's like training is involved when wearing those masks. It's not like you're wearing a Halloween costume or something. You're wearing something that is saving your life, but it's going to be kind of hard to get used to using. So what do you think about that?
Well, it may be that, the masks may or may not be all that effective. They may be handed out more in a sense of reassurance to the Israeli people than real effectiveness. I mean, we've come to understand now that all of the nuclear war propaganda that we were getting in our schools in the 1950s, the government knew those things weren't going to work, like duck and cover, pull the picnic tablecloth over your head and you'll be safe from the nuclear bomb. It was put out there to basically reassure the American people nuclear war was survivable and not stand up and scream that we shouldn't be going down that road toward those weapons. And it really wasn't going to work, and Israel may be playing the same game with their own people. Now, it is nice that they do have those fans to make it easier to use, but I'm wondering about all those people who are wearing beards for religious reasons. What are they going to do? Because the gas masks won't go on over those.
Yeah, it requires training to use those things. That's my point. And
yes.
A lot of people realize you can't just put a mask on and think it's going to save your life. It's a shame, but at any rate, what a crazy world we live in. What can I say?
Yeah, boy, that's an understatement. And you know what? And the funny thing, and I was serious about this, Jerry, that thanks to the Internet, a lot of people around this planet understands that by and large, the American people, we're not warmongering type of people. We prefer not to be in war, but it's the type of government that we have and the war machine that we have built. Ultimately, it is our country, and ultimately we will pay the price if something bad happens. But by and large, most people understand that we're not in control of our own government, which might be double plus good for us if the time comes. One more call. We only have a couple minutes left. Art, hello. How you doing?
Hey, guys. How you doing, man?
Good.
Mike mentioned earlier about, it wouldn't be very hard for Israel to put one of those Dolphin-class subs in the Mediterranean there and fire at the U.S. ships and claim it was Iran. See, they did have a real weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I got to thinking, and I want to run this by you and see what you think the odds. Let's say, for example, Obama goes through with this 48-hour, 72-hour, whatever, strike on Syria, thinking he's going to get away with that. How hard would it be at that point all of a sudden have, say, a dozen or so state capitals around the country all of a sudden get hit with suicide bombers and claim they were sleeper cells we didn't know about, and they all came from Iran and Syria?
Certainly possible.
Don't you find it a little bit odd? Here we are, the CIA installed the Shah of Iran in the year I was born, back in 1953, and here we are again. They got a little ticked off. They didn't like the way things are going, and this radical Islamic cleric comes rolling into town and takes over in 1979, and they've been chomping at the bit to try to take Iran back under some sort of control. Well, it hasn't happened. My question is, if we fear terrorism so much, why are we in the Middle East pissing so many people off that there might be, and I say might be, retaliatory individual strikes at U.S. targets? And I said might.
Well, that was just something I got to thinking about. I mean, and that, to me, I think would be a more likely scenario rather than a Dolphin-class sub. I think it would be more likely scenario that they would pull something like retaliation on U.S. soil, because something like that, when you think about the mind of a despot,
but here's the problem with the false flags they've been pulling off there. They're so damn sloppy, they don't even care to be good enough to try to make a plausible false flag attack. I think they'd be under severe scrutiny, and I think at that point in time, there'd be enough political enemies. I think the political fur might fly. Just a guess.
Hey, thanks, Dave.
Okay, thanks, Art. Michael Rivero, thank you. I appreciate your time, sir.
Well, by my pleasure, and let's do it again.
All right, and I'm serious about that. If you don't want to talk about yourself, have your wife do it.
We're not allowed to use those kind of words on the radio.
Oh, that's right. Billy Bob can't say that word. Thank you.